He whispered it into the radio before a single shot was fired. "Don't kill them. Leave them breathing. She'll come for them." 6 elite operators were bleeding out beneath shattered concrete in the frozen dark of Blackstone Pass. They had no idea the ambush wasn't meant for them. Every explosion, every mined rout, every desperate radio transmission screaming for rescue, all of it had been engineered for one purpose, one target. A woman who was supposed to be on a plane home. A woman who had already promised herself she was done. They didn't need to kill Captain Elena Cross. They just needed her to turn around. If the story already has you holding your breath, follow my channel, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The duffel bag was already zipped. That was the thing Elena kept thinking about afterward. That the bag had been zipped, the gift had been wrapped, the cab had been requested for 0600, and for the first time in 3 years and 9 months, she had actually gone to bed before midnight without a sidearm on the nightstand. She'd made herself put it in the drawer. Had to think about it for almost a full minute before she could leave it there. Small things, but they mattered. She was 30 years old and her father hadn't seen her face in person since her mother's funeral. Not because she didn't love him, because every time she tried to leave, something happened. That was the job. That was always the job. This time was supposed to be different. The alarm didn't ring. The alarm screamed. The compound-wide klaxon that meant something had gone wrong at a level that couldn't wait for a briefing. Elena was on her feet before she was fully conscious, muscle memory dragging her body upright while her mind caught up. She sat on the edge of her bunk for exactly 2 seconds, looked at the duffel bag by the door, looked at her boots on the floor beside the nightstand. She put on the boots. The command center at Iron Ridge was a controlled panic when she got there. Controlled because the people inside knew how to keep their voices level, even when the information coming through the satellite feeds made their hands shake. Panicked because the information was genuinely bad. Colonel Warren Hatch was standing at the main display with his arms crossed, and his jaw set the way it got when he'd already made a decision and was waiting for someone to challenge it. He was 53, former Ranger, and he had the kind of face that showed nothing, which meant, to everyone who'd worked with him long enough, that it was showing everything. Cross. He didn't turn around. "Get a cup of coffee. You're going to need it." What happened? Bravo team hit a minefield on Route 17 at 2200. 3 vehicles disabled. 2 operators KIA at the scene, 4 more wounded, status critical, 1 confirmed stable. Air support was rerouted for weather. Storms moving in from the north, ETA 4 hours. Elena moved to the display. The satellite feed showed the valley and thermal imaging. 6 heat signatures clustered beneath the ruins of what had been a concrete culvert bridge. Maybe 50 meters of cover in a space that could hold 10 people if they didn't mind bleeding on each other. How many hostiles? 3 confirmed machine gun emplacements, here, here, and here. Hatch tapped the screen. Possibly more in the ridgeline. Minefield extends across every primary exfil route we've mapped. And about 40 minutes ago, Signals Intercept picked up an encrypted transmission from the valley. He handed her a printout. She read it once, then again. "Don't kill them. Leave them breathing. She'll come for them." The room had gone quiet in the specific way it gets when everyone is pretending to look at something else. "Who's she?" Elena asked. Nobody answered. She looked up. Hatch was watching her. She set the paper down slowly. "Who cleared my travel schedule for tonight?" "It was in the system," said Lieutenant Dara Ose from the signal station. 26, sharp. The kind of young officer who listened more than she talked and never forgot anything she heard. "Standard admin transparency. Anyone with base-level clearance could have seen your departure time. Someone wanted to know when I'd be gone." "Or," Hatch said carefully, "someone wanted to know how quickly you'd come back." She stood at the window for a while and looked at the dark. The mountains were invisible in the cloud cover, but she knew exactly where they were, had spent enough hours in that valley to feel the geography like something built into her chest. 4 critical casualties. No air extraction. A snowstorm coming that would ground everything for 12 to 18 hours once it hit. By the time conventional rescue assets could be organized, cleared, and inserted, 3 of those 4 men would be dead from blood loss and exposure. And someone had planned it that way. The rational response, the response Hatch was clearly waiting for her to choose, was to hand the problem to the alert QRF, Let them develop options and wait for the weather window. Standard protocol. Lives would likely be lost, but throwing an improvised rescue team into a prepared ambush with an active sniper presence and a mind approach was how you turned 6 casualties into 12. She knew all of this. "Who else is still on base?" she asked. Hatch's expression shifted. "Not much." "Cross, I'm not asking for permission, sir. I'm asking who's available." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up the duty roster on the secondary screen. Tuss. She found Sergeant First Class Marcus Briggs in the motor pool, doing something to the undercarriage of a MATV that almost certainly wasn't in his job description. He was 41, heavy set in the way that looked soft until he moved, with hands that were always dirty and a demolitions background that had made him either very good at his job or very dead several times over. So far, it had been the former. "You seen the alert?" she asked. He slid out from under the vehicle and looked at the ceiling. "I was hoping it was a drill. It's not." "Yeah." He sat up, wiped his hands on a rag that made them look dirtier. "Bravo team, minefield." "I know." He looked at her. "You got a route?" "No, that's why I need you." "Fantastic." He threw the rag aside and stood up. "What else?" Corporal Yusuf Madani was in the medical station, technically off rotation, reading a paperback with a broken spine that had been taped and retaped so many times the tape was peeling off the tape. He was 24, a battlefield trauma nurse who had been in country for 8 months and had the specific kind of quiet that came from having seen things he hadn't quite found words for yet. He put the book down when she walked in, looked at her face, looked at her boots. "Grab your kit," she said. He didn't ask any questions. That was why she'd come to him. The third person was harder. Specialist Keiko Farrell was 19, which was technically old enough, legally old enough, operationally cleared, and still 19. And she was the best reconnaissance asset on the base at reading terrain from satellite imagery and translating it into something a human body could actually navigate. She'd also never been on a live extraction under fire. Elena found her in the signals room, already staring at the Blackstone Pass imagery on a secondary monitor. "You've been looking at this," Elena said, "for the last 40 minutes. Farrell didn't look up. "There's a route. It's not good, but it's there." "Show me." Farrell pulled up the thermal overlay and pointed. "Machine gun nest Alpha is here, covering the main approach. Nest Bravo watches the eastern ridge. Nest Charlie is the problem. It's positioned to cover what looks like the only other entry angle." She tapped a vertical scar of cliff face on the western side of the valley. "Except nobody would actually try to climb that in these conditions, so they haven't mined it." "Because nobody would be stupid enough," Elena said. "That's generally how traps work, ma'am. The safe door is the one that looks impossible." Elena looked at her. 19 years old, already thinking like that. "You're coming with us." Farrell finally looked up. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, but a close relative of it. "I figured." "Tiens." Hatch found Elena in the equipment room while she was pulling her kit together. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment without speaking. She could feel him deciding what to say. "You know this could be exactly what they want," he finally said. "I know. They've mined every approach. They have 3 hardened emplacements. They have an active sniper with confirmed kills who's apparently been watching this base for weeks." He paused. "And they specifically transmitted a message to ensure we knew they were waiting for you." "I know that too." "Then explain to me what your plan is." She pulled the chest rig over her shoulders and clipped the front. "My plan is to make them wrong." "That's not a plan. That's an attitude." "It's both." She turned to face him. "Sir, if I don't go, those soldiers die waiting. If I do go, and I'm walking into a prepared position designed to kill me specifically, then they've anticipated standard tactics and standard thinking." She checked the chamber of her rifle. "So I'm not going to use either." Hatch stared at her for a long time. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "it won't. You don't know that." "No." She slung the rifle. "But they don't know that I know it's a trap. And that's the only advantage I've got, so I'm going to use it." He stepped aside from the doorway, not approving, not ordering her to stop, just stepping aside. "Check in every 20 minutes, he said. "Every 30, I won't have signal in the valley." He nodded once, stiffly, the way men who've sent people they respect into dangerous situations have been nodding since there have been dangerous situations to send people into. She walked out. The drive to the staging point at the base of Blackstone Pass took 40 minutes on roads that got worse every mile. The temperature was dropping fast. Elena could feel the shift even inside the vehicle, the cold finding the gaps in her gear and making itself known. Briggs drove without being asked. Madani sat in the back, checking and rechecking his medical kit with the methodical focus of someone who used routine to manage dread, and Farrell had a topographic printout spread across her knees and a red light torch between her teeth. "Talk to me about the cliff route," Elena said. Farrell removed the torch. 60 meters of exposed climbing, loose rock at the top, better below. If it was summer and we had gear, 40 minutes. Tonight, in the dark, with snow coming, she calculated. Maybe an hour and 10. And the bottom of the cliff puts us where? Directly behind Nest Charlie. We'd have maybe 40 meters of flat approach to reach cover behind the culvert bridge. 40 meters across open ground coming off a cliff in the dark, Briggs said, with a trained sniper somewhere on the ridgeline. Yes, Farrell said. Great. What else? If we take Charlie out first before Nest Alpha and Bravo know we're in the valley, they'll be listening for contact to their east, not their west. We'd have maybe 60 seconds of confusion before they reorient. 60 seconds is enough, Elena said. Madani looked up from his kit. Enough for what? Enough to get to the wounded. She turned in her seat to look at him. You're not going to have a sterile environment or time. What can you actually do out there? He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. Stop the immediate bleeds. Hypothermia management if I have anything to work with. I can't do surgery. But I can keep people from dying in the next 4 hours, which is what they need. That's what they need, she agreed. Briggs slowed the vehicle and killed the headlights. They were close enough now that the valley was a black shape against a slightly less black sky. Snow was beginning, not the heavy fall that was coming, just the advanced scouts, individual flakes that caught the red glow of the instrument panel. One more thing, Farrell said quietly. She folded her printout. The transmission. She'll come for them. I've been thinking about that phrasing. And it's specific, not they'll come or rescue will come. She. Farrell looked at Elena in the rearview mirror. Whoever this is, they're not guessing you'd respond. They've been watching you, specifically you, long enough to know how you think. The vehicle was silent for a moment except for the engine and the beginning snow. Then they should already know, Elena said, that I've never once done exactly what someone expected me to do. She opened the door. The cold hit like a wall. Boo! They moved in single file with Farrell on point and Elena last, which was backwards from doctrine and exactly where she needed to be to see the whole picture. Briggs walked with his demolitions kit distributed across 4 separate pouches. She'd noticed he never kept things in a single location, a habit from some early career incident he'd never fully explained. Madani had stripped his medical bag down to what fit under his kit and moved quiet. Farrell was good in the dark, better than Elena had expected from someone with her background. Signals and imagery analysis, not field time. She moved without hesitation, reading the ground, keeping to low terrain, and only stopped once to crouch and study a specific section of frozen soil for 30 seconds before waving them around it to the left. What was that? Elena murmured as she passed. Disturbed ground. Not natural. Could be nothing. A pause. Wasn't nothing. They gave it 6 meters of clearance. The base of the cliff was worse than the imagery had suggested, which was always the case. The rock was wet under a thin film of new ice, and the first 10 meters were an angled scramble rather than a proper climb. The kind of terrain that ate ankles if you moved too fast and cost you minutes if you moved too slow. Elena went up second, behind Briggs, who moved like he'd done this before, which he probably had. Halfway up, her radio clicked. 1 click. Signals monitoring. She clicked back twice. We're here. Moving. Above her, Briggs stopped, pressed himself flat against the rock. She did the same without being asked. Something moved on the ridge above them. Not close, maybe 80 meters, but distinct against the dark. A shape that resolved into a person, then into a person with a long rifle, moving along the ridgeline with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who wasn't searching, someone who was watching a specific sector. The sniper. Had to be. He moved north, parallel to the cliff, not looking down, watching the valley floor. Elena pressed her cheek against wet rock and counted his steps. He walked 30 meters north. Stopped. Turned. Walked back. A pattern. Not a random watch. A pattern which meant he was confident. Confident enough to be predictable. That was something. She touched Briggs's boot. 2 taps. He looked down. She pointed up, then made a circling motion. He nodded. The sniper's pattern gave them a window. His back turn was a 4-second blind spot on the west face. 4 seconds per cycle, roughly 90 seconds between cycles. They'd need 2 cycles to reach the top. She looked at her watch. The storm was maybe 3 hours out now. The valley below was silent except for wind. They built this, she thought. Every piece of it. They chose this valley, this night, these minefields. They knew about the weather. They knew about air support limitations. They knew. What else did they know? The top of the cliff was a narrow ledge of broken shale before the ground leveled off into the valley's western slope. They came over in sequence, Farrell first, Elena last, during the sniper's northern pass, and they were flat on the shale before he completed his turn. 40 meters to the culvert bridge. Open ground, snow-dusted, no cover until the structure itself. Nest Charlie was visible from here. A low sandbag wall with what looked like a crew of 2 and an M240 on a bipod, barrel pointing east. They hadn't seen anything to look west for because nothing was supposed to come from the west. Briggs, Elena breathed. Time? He studied the position. 30 seconds with the right approach. But once I move, everybody hears it. Then we do it all at once. She looked at Farrell. Can you get to the east side of the culvert from here, below the sight line of Charlie, and set up a decoy? Something that makes noise, looks like contact from the east? Farrell pulled out a compact signal device from her kit, an emergency flare assembly she'd clearly modified before leaving base. Elena hadn't asked her to bring it. She had anyway. I can send up 2 quick bursts on the eastern slope, simulate a contact light, then go dark, Farrell said. Do it on my mark. 30 seconds after you fire, Briggs takes Charlie. The moment Charlie is down, we move to the wounded. Madani already had his bag repositioned. He'd been running the geometry in his head, she could tell from his expression. Which injuries do I hit first? Whoever's bleeding fastest. She looked at him. You'll know when you get there. He nodded. She looked at all 3 of them in the dark and the scattered snow. 24, 41 Ussen, 19 years old. A nurse, a demolition specialist, a reconnaissance analyst. Her team, the people standing between 6 soldiers and the cold that was going to kill them. Not an assault force. Not the unit she'd have built if she'd had choices. But they were here. They'd all chosen to be here. I know this isn't the mission any of you trained for, she said. Not a speech, just a fact. I'm asking you to do it anyway. Briggs made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Captain, I've been doing things I didn't train for since 2009. Let's get these people home. Farrell's signal burst lit the eastern slope in a cold white flash. For exactly 4 seconds, both machine gun crews on Alpha and Bravo pivoted toward unexpected contact on their left flank. Briggs was already moving before the light died. Elena ran. The 40 meters of open ground took 11 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. Some counting mechanism in her brain that ran automatically whenever she was in danger. The culvert bridge came up fast, a low concrete structure blown partially open on its western face, and she was through the gap and into the dark before her conscious mind caught up with her body. 6 soldiers. She could see them now in the shelter of the broken concrete. Some sitting, some prone, one very still in a way that meant the worst. The one conscious and mobile had a rifle up and aimed at her face before she finished moving through the gap. She held up her hands. Cross! Captain Elena Cross, Iron Ridge. The rifle came down. Jesus Christ, the soldier said. His name tape read Santos. Staff Sergeant, which meant he was probably the senior conscious person here. He looked at her like she'd dropped from the sky. How did you... The minefields. West approach, cliff face. Are you the senior ranking? Yes, ma'am. Status. He rattled it off quickly. The way people do when they've been rehearsing the information for hours, because saying it out loud is the only thing keeping them functional. 2 KIA. Confirmed, no retrieval possible yet. 1 stable with a lower leg fracture. 1 unconscious, possible TBI, breathing irregular. 2 with severe lacerations and blood loss. 1 of those critical. Madani was already at the critical one before Santos finished talking. Elena keyed her radio, clicked 4 times. We're at the objective, beginning medical. 2 clicks back from Hatch. Copy. Then a 3rd click she hadn't expected. 1 click alone, on a slightly different frequency. She stared at her radio. That frequency wasn't base, wasn't the team, wasn't any asset she'd deployed tonight. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. She didn't press it. Santos, she said quietly. Before the ambush, did you receive any unusual traffic? Anything that felt off? Santos thought. We had a route update about 40 minutes before we hit the field. Command traffic, encrypted, came through normal channels. He paused. But the timing felt late. We were already moving. Who authorized the route update? It came from operations, had the right authentication codes. He looked at her. You think someone in operations sent us into the field? She didn't answer. Madani was working fast on the critical casualty. Briggs was at the gap, watching the approach. And Farrell was somewhere on the eastern slope, having just made herself a target, so the rest of them could move. The situation was tactically still alive. They weren't out. They weren't even close to out. But the single radio click sat in Elena's mind like a stone dropped into still water. Someone had just told her they were watching. Not the sniper on the ridge. Not the machine gun crews. Someone with access to her frequency. Someone who wanted her to know they could reach her. Outside the culvert, the wind was picking up. The storm was moving faster than predicted. 3 hours had become something closer to 90 minutes, which meant their extraction window was closing and closing fast. And somewhere above them on the ridgeline, a man called Phantom was rotating through his pattern, waiting, biding his time with the specific patience of someone who already knew how the night was going to end. He just didn't know yet that she did too. Madani looked up from the critical casualty. His hands were dark with blood, and his expression was the flat-focused thing that meant he was managing something serious. He's stable, he said. For now. But we need to move in the next 30 minutes, or we lose him to hypothermia. 30 minutes. Elena looked at the 3 machine gun nests between them and the extraction point. At the minefields on every documented route. At the sniper somewhere above them who had been engineered into this valley the same way every other piece of this night had been engineered. Engineered for her. She took a breath of cold air that tasted like snow and metal and thought about every moment of the last 4 years that had built to this specific night. Every mission, every decision, every time she'd done the thing that other people said was wrong and been right. Every time she'd been right and paid for it anyway. She thought about the radio click. About the route update that came 40 minutes too late. About a transmission heard before anyone fired a shot. She'll come for them. And she thought about what it meant that someone had built all of this, spent months planning all of this, just to get her into a frozen valley in the middle of the night. It meant they were afraid of something. People who weren't afraid didn't spend months building traps. She turned to Briggs at the gap. I need you to be able to take all 3 nests in under 4 minutes. Tell me if that's possible. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Define possible, he said. I need a true answer, not a reassuring one. He thought. Actually thought. Not performing thinking, but doing it. Running numbers, playing scenarios, checking what he had against what the problem required. She'd worked with people who faked that calculation and people who actually did it, and Briggs was the second kind, which was the only reason she'd brought him. With the right distractions at the right times, he finally said, and if Alpha and Bravo are already turned the wrong direction when I move on them. He stopped. Yeah, it's possible. It's bad odds, but it's possible. Bad odds are what we have. Then yeah, he met her eyes. 4 minutes. Maybe 3.5 if you give me something loud on the east side when I hit Alpha. She looked at the soldiers around her, the wounded, the ones who still had a chance if she made the right call in the next 5 minutes. Santos watching her with something in his expression that wasn't quite trust yet, More like a willingness to extend trust to someone who'd climbed a cliff face in the dark to get to him. She thought about her duffel bag back at the base, the wrapped gift inside it, her father's kitchen table with the good coffee he only made when she visited. She set it all aside. Briggs, here's what we're going to do. She never heard the round that came for her. That was the thing about Phantom. By the time she understood he'd fired, the bullet had already passed 3 inches from her left cheek and blown a chunk of concrete off the wall behind her head. She hit the deck on instinct, heart slamming, ears ringing from the nearness of it. Santos dropped beside her. Sniper. I know. She touched her face. Dust, stone fragments, no blood. That was deliberate. He missed. He didn't miss. She pressed against the wall and looked at the shot angle. The round had come from high on the north ridge, not the pattern position she'd tracked on the way up. He'd moved. He showed me he could have killed me, chose not to. Santos stared at her. That's a message. She looked at Madani. How long? 20 minutes, maybe 25. 20 minutes. Cool. Above them, somewhere in the dark and the beginning snowfall, Phantom had her position, had probably had it since before she finished climbing the cliff. He'd let her reach the wounded, let her plan, let her think she was working toward a solution, all while he waited. What are you waiting for? The radio clicked once more. Same frequency, same patient silence. She understood then, really understood, the understanding that sat in the stomach rather than the head, that this wasn't finished, that the ambush, the minefields, the machine gun nests, even Phantom on the ridge, they were all just pieces of something larger that she hadn't seen yet, something that had started months before tonight, something that wasn't going to end when she got these soldiers out of the valley. Outside the culvert, the snow was coming harder now. The storm was arriving early, the way storms did when they wanted to make a point. Somewhere above the cloud cover, a satellite was watching this valley and transmitting to a command center where Hatch stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set, watching 6 heat signatures and 4 heat signatures gathered around them like a small and unlikely miracle. And somewhere else, in a warm room with good communications and access to encrypted military frequencies. Someone was watching too, and they were smiling. The radio clicked a third time. Elena was still pressed against the inner wall of the culvert, concrete dust in her eyelashes, and the ringing in her ears fading to a low-frequency hum that told her the round had come closer than 3 inches. Her body knew things her brain was still catching up to. Her hands were steady. That was the part that had always unsettled people who didn't know her. The hands staying steady while everything else went loud. Santos was watching her from 2 feet away with an expression that had graduated from cautious trust to something closer to bewildered. You said he showed you he could kill you, Santos said. How does that help us? It means he has a reason to keep me alive. She looked at the radio. Which means there's something he wants that he can't get from a corpse. What does he want? She didn't answer because she didn't know yet, and she'd stopped pretending to know things she didn't sometime around her second deployment. What she knew was smaller and more useful. The click had come on a frequency that wasn't base, wasn't team, wasn't any asset she'd authorized. Someone had her channel, had probably had it for a while, and they'd used it twice now. Not to communicate, not to threaten, just to let her know they were there. I see you. That was all it said. I see you, and I'm letting you. That kind of patience wasn't a sniper's patience. Snipers waited for shots. This was something different. She shoved it into the back of her mind and turned to Briggs. Change of plan, she said. We're not going in sequence. Briggs was crouched at the concrete gap watching the approaches, and he turned halfway without taking his eyes off the dark. What are we doing? Alpha and Bravo simultaneously, then we move everyone through the gap in Charlie's sight line while they're reorienting. We don't have time for a staged approach anymore. The storm's going to close our window in... She checked her watch. 60 minutes, maybe less. Simultaneous takes 2 people on separate approaches, Briggs said. You and me. That leaves Madani with the casualties and Farrell running solo on the eastern slope. I know. Farrell's 19. I know that too. He turned to look at her fully then. I'm not saying she can't do it. I'm saying you've thought about it. I've thought about it. She held his eyes. I've thought about all of it. This is what we have. He turned back to the gap. A long pause. All right, walk me through the approach angle. She pulled Farrell's topographic printout from her kit and unfolded it on the floor between them, using her red light torch to keep the glow minimal. Madani glanced over from the casualty he was managing, took in the map and their positions in one sweep, and went back to his work without a word. The critical soldier, whose name tape she finally read as Velez, was breathing more steadily than before, which was Madani's doing, though the color in his face was the color of old concrete and getting worse. Santos crouched beside her and looked at the map. He'd been a staff sergeant long enough to read terrain imagery without being talked through it. You're going up that ridge to take Alpha? West side. Briggs goes east for Bravo. Longer route, but more concealment. We move in opposite directions, hit our targets within 45 seconds of each other. And if one of you gets made before you reach your target, then whoever is still in position fires on their own target, creates confusion, and we improvise. Santos absorbed that. That's a generous use of the word plan. I know. He was quiet for a second, then, I've got 2 operators who can move under their own power. Limited combat effectiveness, but they can carry. Let me use them. I need you here managing the extraction once the nests are down. You're the only one who can move these casualties fast. Then give me something to do in the meantime besides watch the roof. She thought. You know radio protocol for Iron Ridge operations? Yeah. I need you monitoring this frequency. She adjusted his earpiece to the click channel. Don't transmit. Don't respond. Just listen. If anything comes through besides silence and clicks, you find a way to tell me immediately. He took the earpiece and looked at it for a moment before putting it in. What am I listening for? I'll know it when you describe it. She stood. Don't let Madani run out of light. She went north first. The west approach to Nest Alpha was 200 meters of broken terrain that climbed steadily and put her above the gun crew's sightline by the time she was in position. In theory. In practice, the slope had patches of loose shale that moved under her boots and one section of exposed flat, where she had to cross 15 meters of moonlit snow with her profile low and her pace controlled, and her entire nervous system screaming at her to run. She didn't run. Running on open ground at night with a prepared enemy position above you was how people died from the kind of wound that took a long time. She moved at the pace the terrain allowed, kept her breathing even, and when she reached the dead ground below the nest's field of fire, she stopped and pressed herself into the rock and counted her own heartbeat until it came down from 120 to something more useful. The crew at Alpha were 2 people. She'd confirmed that from the thermal imagery, but confirmation from imagery and confirmation from 30 meters in the dark were different things. She could see them now. One on the gun, one slightly behind and left, smoking something, which was either a serious breach of noise and light discipline or evidence that they were very comfortable. Comfortable meant they didn't expect contact from this direction. That was good. Comfortable also made people slow to respond when contact came anyway. She checked her watch. 60 seconds until Briggs would be in position on Bravo. She thought about what Santos had said. That's a generous use of the word plan. He wasn't wrong. The entire operation had been generous uses of inadequate words. Rescue, route, window. None of them quite fit the actual shape of the situation, but she'd learned a long time ago that the plan wasn't the point. The plan was a structure to hang decisions on, and the decisions changed every 30 seconds once things went live. What mattered wasn't having the right plan. What mattered was being able to think when the plan became wrong. The smoker's ember flared orange. Elena moved up the last 10 meters. She didn't use her rifle on Alpha Crew. That was the calculation she'd made on the approach and hadn't told Briggs, because Briggs would have argued, and she didn't have time for an argument she was going to win anyway. Rifle fire on Alpha, even suppressed, would give Phantom a precise location. A muzzle flash at night, even partial, was a gift to a trained sniper. She'd spent too much of the last 4 years thinking about what she would give trained snipers if she were on the other end of the problem. What she used instead took 40 seconds and made almost no noise and left both crew members secured and incapacitated behind their own sandbag wall, which was undignified for them, but significantly better than the alternative. The man who'd been smoking woke up briefly during the process and said something that might have been a question, and she put her hand over his mouth and her full body weight behind it and waited until he stopped asking. She keyed her radio. 2 clicks. 3 clicks back. Briggs was on Bravo. She took the M240 off its bipod, pointed it at the rock below, and disabled the feed mechanism with 3 seconds of focused effort. The gun could be fixed by someone who knew what they were doing. It would take them several minutes to figure out what had been done, and several more to fix it, and by then she intended to be somewhere else entirely. She was back down the slope before the 60-second mark. Olka. Briggs met her at the culvert entrance 4 minutes later, moving fast for a man his size. He had a cut above his eye that hadn't been there before, and he was holding pressure on it with 2 fingers while he walked, which meant it wasn't serious enough to stop for, but noticeable enough that she looked at it. "Tree branch," he said. "In the dark. Moving fast in the dark." He pulled his hand away and looked at his fingers. Still bleeding some. "Bevo crew made me at 30 meters. Had to move quicker than I wanted." "They're down?" "They're down." He paused. Not cleanly. It was loud. "How loud?" "Loud enough that Alpha might have heard, if they're listening." Elena looked back at the approach. Nothing moving yet, but the timer had just shortened by an unknowable amount. Inside the culvert, Madani was already preparing Velez for movement, which involved a field splint improvisation that looked like it had taken the better part of the last 20 minutes to construct from what he'd had available. It wasn't pretty, it was functional. She could tell the difference. 30 seconds, she told the room. Santos had his 2 mobile operators on their feet. The stable fracture case, Rourke, was standing on a makeshift crutch that was actually Santos's rifle with the stock down, which spoke to the specific creative problem-solving that happened when trained soldiers had too much time and not enough options. The TBI case was conscious now, which was better than before, though his eyes had the unfocused quality of someone whose brain was still catching up with events. "What's his name?" she asked Santos quietly. "Donovan. He's been in and out." She crouched in front of Donovan and put her face in his line of sight. "Donovan, I'm Captain Cross. We're moving in 30 seconds. I need you to follow Sergeant Santos. You understand?" Donovan looked at her. His pupils weren't equal, which wasn't good, but they were both responding, which was better than nothing. "Yes, ma'am," he said, slow but deliberate. "Good." She stood, looked at the gap in the culvert wall, at the 40 meters of open ground between them and the base of the slope where the terrain would give them cover for the extraction route, at the ridgeline above where Nest Charlie was still active, and Phantom was still somewhere, and the early snow was still falling harder than it had been 10 minutes ago. Farrell appeared at the gap. She was breathing hard, but her hands were steady on her weapon, and her expression was the expression of someone who had done something they weren't sure they could do and found out they could. "Charlie crew is pinned watching the eastern slope. I put a second flare burst on a 30-second delay, set to trigger when I crossed back. They should be looking east for another 2 minutes." 2 minutes. "Then we go now," Elena said. "Santos, you're in the middle with Donovan and Velez. Briggs and Farrell flank. I'm on point. We move at the pace of the slowest person, which means we move fast and nobody gets left. Questions?" No questions. That was either very good or it was the particular silence of people who had questions but knew there wasn't time. She went through the gap first. The 40 meters took 90 seconds. Velez made it 8 meters before his legs gave out, and Santos caught him and got a shoulder under him without breaking stride. Rourke moved on the rifle crutch with a controlled desperation that was almost graceful if you didn't look at his face, which showed how much it cost him. Donovan followed Santos with his hand on Santos's shoulder and his eyes slightly wrong, but his feet doing what they were supposed to do. Farrell and Briggs moved in opposite arcs around the group, watching the approaches, rifle up, ready. 30 meters, 20. Elena heard the Charlie crew before she saw them move. A shout, short, sharp, in a language she didn't speak but didn't need to. The sound of the crew reorienting, the bipod swinging on the M240. "Run," she said. Not loud, just clearly. They ran. The M240 opened up a half-second later, traversing left from where they'd been. The rounds hit the ground 10 meters behind them, then chased left as the crew corrected. Then the terrain dip took them below the gun's depression angle, and the rounds started sparking off rock above their heads instead of the ground beneath their feet. And then they were in the dead ground and the shooting was still happening, but it was shooting into nothing. They kept moving. The extraction route was the one Farrell had mapped from the imagery. a drainage gully that ran north by northeast, too narrow for vehicles but manageable on foot, and it led eventually to a dirt road that connected to a staging area 2 kilometers out. Not a good extraction point, not even a particularly safe one, but it was reachable without crossing a minefield, which put it ahead of every other option. They moved for 20 minutes. Velez made it under Santos's support for the first 10, before Briggs came around to the other side and took half the weight without being asked or acknowledged. They just redistributed and kept going. Rourke lost the rifle crutch to a rock at the 7-minute mark and took the fall on his good leg and bit down on whatever sound he was going to make and got back up. Donovan walked the whole route with Santos's hand on his arm and a look on his face like he was very far away, which maybe he was. Elena moved ahead of the group, checked each turn, came back, moved ahead again. Her shoulder was reporting a constant low-level complaint from the cliff climb that she was categorizing as not important yet. She was 30 years old, and she'd had enough injuries to know the difference between the kind of pain that was trying to tell her something she needed to hear and the kind that was just registering events for the record. This was the second kind. She'd deal with it when dealing with it was an option. At the 15-minute mark, she called a halt in a wide section of the gully and keyed her radio. 4 clicks. Patch's voice came through immediately, patchy from the terrain but intelligible. Cross, say status. 6 souls moving under own power, 2 with assistance, 1 TBI, 1 lower extremity fracture, 1 recovering from critical blood loss. We need a ground vehicle at the Route 12 staging point in approximately 40 minutes, storm permitting. A pause. Storm's ahead of schedule. You have 30 minutes before visibility goes to 0 and roads become impassable. 30 minutes for a 2-kilometer route carrying wounded through a drainage gully in the beginning of a whiteout. Copy, she said. Have the vehicle running. She cut the transmission, didn't tell the group. They were moving as fast as they could move, and telling them they needed to move faster wasn't actionable information. What was actionable was her own pace setting. Moving, she said, and went ahead. It was Farrell who caught it. She dropped back to rear security 10 minutes in, Elena's instruction, because rear security was the position most likely to catch someone following, and Elena trusted Farrell's eyes more than her own right now because Farrell wasn't managing the route simultaneously. Farrell was just watching. At the 19-minute mark, she came up fast to Elena's position and touched her arm once without speaking. Elena stopped, made the halt signal. The group stopped behind her. Movement. Behind us, North Ridge, 200 meters. Farrell's voice was barely breath. Single person. Moving parallel to our route. Not following, keeping pace. The sniper. Has to be, Elena thought. Phantom had a high ground position, mobility, and apparently enough local knowledge to move at their pace through the storm's early conditions without losing them. He wasn't closing the distance. He wasn't taking shots. He'd had clean angles 3 times in the last 10 minutes that she could see from here, which meant he could see them. He was choosing not to fire. What are you waiting for? She looked at Farrell. Can you get a position on the ridgeline? Not to engage, just to see him. Farrell looked at the rock above them and calculated. If I go up 20 meters, there's a ledge. I'd have an angle north. Do it fast. Farrell went. 30 seconds, which felt longer. When she came back down, her expression was different, not frightened, something more complicated than frightened. He saw me, Farrell said. You saw him. We both... She stopped. He looked right at me, Captain. I had my rifle up, and he looked right at me, and he didn't move. Didn't raise his weapon. Just... She paused. He put his hand up, like... She showed the gesture. Open hand. Not aggressive. Elena said nothing for a moment. He's not trying to stop us, Farrell said. No. Then what is he doing? The same question she'd been asking for the last hour. And the shape of the answer was getting clearer. Not clear enough to hold, but clear enough to make her extremely uncomfortable. Phantom had been positioned to kill from the beginning. He'd fired 1 round, deliberately short. He was now escorting them. That was the word that fit the behavior, uncomfortable as it was, through his own operational area, making sure nobody else moved against them, which meant either he'd changed objectives, or his objectives had never been what she thought they were. She pushed it away. 20 minutes to the staging point, wounded people behind her, storm closing. Keep moving, she said. The vehicle was there. Two headlights in the thickening snow, a MATV with its engine running, and Lance Corporal Ayasha Trent behind the wheel with the particular expression of someone who had been told to wait at a specific location in deteriorating conditions and was extremely relieved to finally have something to drive toward. Trent was 22, solid, and she'd been given this assignment because she was the best wheeled vehicle operator on the night roster, which was a very specific skill that Elena had never had the patience to develop properly. They loaded the casualties in reverse order of stability. Velez first, Donovan second, Rourke third, and the logistics of getting 4 people, including 1 critical, into the back of a MATV were not graceful or efficient and took 4.5 minutes that they didn't really have. Briggs climbed in last and looked at Elena, still standing outside the vehicle. "You coming?" She looked back up the drainage gully. The snow was heavy enough now that the visibility was genuinely bad. Phantom's ridge position was invisible. The radio clicked once. She looked at the device in her hand. Same frequency. Same patience. In the noise and the wind and the loaded vehicle with its engine running, the click was almost inaudible. Almost. She got in. The drive back to Iron Ridge took 22 minutes on roads that got worse every kilometer. Trent drove the way good drivers drove in bad conditions. Not fast, not slow, making continuous small corrections, managing the vehicle like a dialogue. Nobody talked much. Madani was monitoring Velez from the back. Santos had his arm around Donovan to keep him stable on the corners. Rourke had his eyes closed and his jaw set and his good leg braced against the floor. Briggs, in the front passenger seat, looked at Elena beside him. She was staring out the windscreen at the snow coming through the headlights. He watched her for a moment. "You're running something," he said. "I'm always running something." "No, you're running something specific. I can tell because you've been quiet for 20 minutes and you're quiet in a specific way when there's a specific problem." She glanced at him. "How long have you known me?" 8 months, and you've already categorized my silences." "I've categorized everyone's silences. It's a survival skill." He paused. "The sniper. That's what you're running." She looked back at the road. "He let us out." "Yeah." "He was in position to stop us 4 times between the gully and the staging point. He had sight lines, he had the angles. He did nothing." "Could be the storm." Visibility was better than 20% for most of that route. He had a night-capable scope, and he'd been active all night. Weather wasn't stopping him. She watched the snow. "He wanted us to get out. Or someone told him to let us get out." Why would someone tell him to let us out? She thought about the trapdoor logic of what she'd been building in the back of her mind for the last 2 hours. The transmission before the shooting started, the route update that came too late, the click on a non-authorized frequency, Phantom positioned to kill but choosing not to. Someone had built tonight's operation to get her into that valley. They'd needed her there, and then they'd needed her out again. "I don't know yet," she said. "But whatever the real objective was tonight, it wasn't killing 6 operators." Briggs was quiet for a while. Outside, the storm was committing fully. The kind of snowfall that didn't negotiate, just arrived and changed everything. The headlights caught it in long horizontals. "The traitor in operations," he said, carefully. "Like testing weight on ice." She looked at him. "The route update," he said. "Someone who could access encrypted authentication codes and push a legitimate-looking order into the field. Someone with sustained access to classified rescue procedures. That's not a hack from outside, that's someone with a seat in the building." She said nothing, which was agreement. "And they specifically leaked your personal travel schedule, or had access to it, and then built an operation designed to make you come back." He stared at the road. "That means someone inside Iron Ridge has been running a separate intelligence operation for months, watching you, planning around your behavior patterns." He turned to her. "That's a professional, not an opportunist." "I know." "So whatever happened in that valley tonight, the ambush, the casualties, Phantom, it was a mechanism," she said, "not the objective." He sat with that. The base lights came into view through the snow, the perimeter lighting, then the gate, then the controlled brightness of the compound against the whiteout. Trent slowed for the checkpoint. A gate guard she didn't recognize waved them through after a 3-second document check, and she noted the face automatically, the way she'd learned to note faces in situations where the faces around her might matter later. The vehicle stopped at the medical center entrance. Doors opened, cold air and organized chaos. A waiting medical team who had clearly been briefed and were moving with the specific efficiency of people who'd been ready for 20 minutes. Velez was on a stretcher and inside within 60 seconds. Rourke limped through under his own power with a medic's hand on his arm. Donovan walked in last, still with that faraway quality, but walking. All 6 soldiers. Home. Elena stood in the snow outside the medical center entrance and watched them go in. The snow was past heavy now and moving towards something that deserved a different word. The kind of fall that made the world go quiet and small and private. Briggs stood beside her for a moment before someone came to collect him for a debrief. Farrell had already been pulled inside by signals personnel who apparently needed her imagery and documentation immediately. Madani was talking to the waiting surgical team. She stood alone. The radio in her hand was silent. She was looking at it when Hatch appeared at her elbow, which was a thing he did, appearing rather than arriving, like he'd always been slightly closer than you thought. Medical team says Velez will make it, he said. Good. Rourke's going to need 2 surgeries on the leg. Donovan's TBI is moderate, prognosis decent. He paused. You got them out. We got them out. Don't be diplomatic with me. You assembled a team in 40 minutes and executed an extraction through a prepared ambush position in 0 visibility conditions. He was quiet for a beat. I've been doing this for 30 years. That was... He stopped himself. You got them out. She looked at him. He had the expression he got when he'd been wrong about something and had decided that acknowledging it was more efficient than not. Sir, she said, I need to talk to you about the route update. The expression changed, tightened. Operations is already flagging it. I know, but there's something else, sir. She looked at the radio. Someone had my personal frequency tonight. Not command, not team, my channel. They used it to signal me 3 times. Hatch went very still. Not to communicate, she said. Not to threaten. Just to tell me they could. You're saying someone had a technical capability to access an encrypted personal frequency and used it to show me they had access. Yes. She met his eyes. That's not a field asset. That's intelligence-level capability. Hatch looked at her for a long moment in the snow. Behind him, through the medical center windows, she could see movement, medical staff working, the organized blur of people who had a specific job and were doing it. The wind pushed the snow sideways for a moment and then let it fall straight again. Who else knows about the frequency? Hatch asked. My team. They don't have the context to read what it means. And you do? I think I'm starting to. He was quiet again. That specific Hatch quiet that meant he was deciding whether to share something he'd been holding back. She'd learned to recognize it over 2 years of working for him. The slight shift in his stance, the way he looked somewhere that wasn't quite at you. The intercept, he said. The original transmission. She'll come for them. He stopped. Sir, there was more. He looked at her directly. We didn't pass it forward because we were still running verification, but the full transmission had an additional line. A beat. It said, she'll come for them, and when she does, she'll find the door we left open. The snow fell between them. A door, Elena said. Yes. They wanted me to find something. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She thought about the valley, about Phantom walking parallel to their extraction route, like a shepherd rather than a hunter. About the click on the unauthorized frequency. Not a threat, not a message, just a signal that said, I'm here and I'm choosing to be here, and I'm letting you know I'm choosing. About a route update that had sent 6 soldiers into a minefield and then created the exact conditions that required her specifically to come and extract them. A mechanism. Not the objective. She had gotten 6 soldiers out of a frozen valley through an impossible approach, and the whole time she'd been operating inside someone else's design. They'd needed her there. They'd needed her to do exactly what she did. Why? She thought about the operations room, about whoever had access to authentication codes and classified procedures and personal travel schedules, about a professional intelligence operation running inside Iron Ridge for months with enough patience and specificity to plan around one woman's behavioral patterns. She thought about the door, What had she done in that valley besides the extraction? What had she touched, said, transmitted, accessed? What had she exposed by being there that she wouldn't have exposed from here? Santos. Before the ambush, did you receive any unusual traffic? The route update. Encrypted, authenticated, legitimate looking. 40 minutes before contact. The route update, she said. Hatch looked at her. If someone in operations pushed that update, she was thinking out loud now, the pieces moving. They had to use the system, authenticated, logged, traceable, but only if someone was looking for it. And before tonight, nobody had a reason to look. And now 6 soldiers got ambushed on a route that was changed 40 minutes before they hit the minefield. She looked at him. Now there's a reason to look. And whoever was looking for that pattern, whoever was waiting for an event that would force operations to run a full communications audit. She stopped. Hatch's expression had shifted into something she hadn't seen from him before. Not surprise exactly, more like the expression of someone who has been hoping a calculation was wrong and is now watching it turn out to be right. That's what they were waiting for, he said, very quietly. The audit. Yes, someone needed Iron Ridge to run a full communications audit, but the only event that would trigger a mandatory audit was a field incident with confirmed casualties and a compromised route. She looked at him. They built an ambush that would force us to look at our own communications traffic. And if we look, we'll find the leak. She paused. Which is what they wanted. The wind came through again, cold and definitive. There's a traitor in operations, Hatch said. And someone else already knows who it is, Elena said. And they needed us to find out too. Tonight. Specifically tonight, before he disappeared. She looked at the radio one more time. The frequency sat silent. The snow was coming hard enough now that it was beginning to settle on her shoulders, on Hatch's graying hair, on every surface that would hold it. Somewhere inside Iron Ridge, in a warm room with access to encrypted systems and classified procedures and personal schedules, a man was watching the lights of the medical center and wondering how much time he had left. And somewhere on a ridge above Blackstone Pass, in the storm that was now consuming the valley entirely, a figure with a long rifle was moving south, away from the valley, away from the bodies, and the disabled guns, and the aftermath of everything he'd been a part of tonight. He would have left the valley the same way he'd entered it, quietly, without a name, without a trace, except that he hadn't been quiet about everything. Farrell had seen him put his hand up, and Elena Cross had heard 3 clicks on a frequency she was never supposed to know about, which meant somewhere in the architecture of what had happened tonight, there was a thread she hadn't pulled yet, and she was very, very good at pulling threads. She went to the debrief first because Hatch asked her to, and because refusing would have cost her access she needed later. The debrief room was the small one off the main operations corridor. 6 chairs, a table that had been in that room since before Elena had arrived at Iron Ridge, and a wall-mounted display that someone had already loaded with the night satellite imagery. Major Delia Forsyth was running it. Forsyth was 44, counterintelligence background, and she had the particular quality of someone who asked questions she already knew the answers to as a method of measuring how much you were willing to tell her. Elena had dealt with counterintelligence officers before. She knew the rhythm. Forsyth started with the timeline. Routes, contact points, the cliff approach, the nest takedowns. She was precise, and she moved fast, and she didn't waste words on things she'd already gotten from Briggs and Farrell, who'd been debriefed separately in the last hour. Elena answered everything directly and completely, and watched Forsyth's pen moving across the legal pad, and noticed the places where it slowed down. It slowed down on the radio clicks. You said you received 3 signals on an unauthorized frequency, Forsyth said. Can you characterize the intervals? Irregular, not coded, just present signals. And you didn't respond. No. Why not? Because I didn't know who was transmitting, and responding would have confirmed my position and identity. Forsyth wrote something. Did you consider that the signals might have been from a hostile asset attempting to track your movement? Yes. And you concluded, I concluded I didn't have enough information to conclude anything, and that responding would cost me more than not responding. She paused. The transmitter knew my position whether I responded or not. They were demonstrating access, not requesting contact. Forsyth looked up. That's a specific interpretation. It's what the behavior indicated. You have signals intelligence training? I have field experience. Forsyth held her eyes for a moment. Not adversarial. Measuring. She wrote something else. The debrief ran 40 minutes. At the end, Forsyth closed her legal pad and looked at Elena with the expression of someone who is going to say something careful. The communications audit is already running, Forsyth said. Operations has flagged the route update, and Signals is tracing the authentication chain. We expect preliminary results within 6 hours. 6 hours. The process has protocols. I know it does. Elena kept her voice level. I'm asking whether we have 6 hours before whatever is going to happen next happens. Forsyth's expression didn't change. What do you think is going to happen next? Elena looked at her. Someone ran a sophisticated intelligence operation inside this base for a sustained period. They're running out of time and they know it. The audit was the mechanism to expose them, which means either they're already gone or they're about to be. She paused. If they're still here, they're not going to wait for the process. Forsyth was quiet for a beat too long. Get some rest, Captain, she said. She didn't get rest. She went to her quarters, sat on the edge of her bunk for approximately 4 minutes, and then got back up and went to the signals station. Ose was still on shift. She'd expected that. Ose ran long when things were moving, the kind of person who didn't leave when the situation was unresolved. She was at her secondary station running what looked like a layered frequency analysis, 2 screens active, a cold cup of something beside her keyboard. Tell me what you're seeing, Elena said. Ose looked up, then around. They were alone in the back section of Signals. Captain, I'm not technically supposed to share audit data with operational personnel during an active Dara. Ose closed her mouth. Elena sat in the adjacent chair and kept her voice low. Someone had my personal frequency tonight. They also pushed a route update through authenticated operations channels that sent 6 soldiers into a minefield. I need to know if those 2 things connect, and the audit won't finish for 6 hours, and I don't think we have 6 hours. Ose looked at her screens, then back at Elena, then at her screens again. The authentication on the route update traces to a terminal in the operations wing, she said carefully. Workstation 7, registered to Major Callum Hurd. Major Callum Hurd. Operations planning. 14 years in service, 2 commendations, clearance level that included classified rescue procedures, and personal schedule access for all senior personnel. Elena had spoken to him 3 times in the last month, and remembered him as quiet, competent, slightly formal, in the way that some people got when they'd been behind a desk long enough that the field felt abstract. She didn't let any of that reach her face. Workstation 7, she said. Who else has access? In theory, any operations officer with Hurd's clearance tier can access any workstation in that wing with their own credentials, but Ose pulled up a second window. The terminal was logged into Hurd's personal account from 1943 to 2021 tonight. Hurd was in the mess hall from 1930 until 2030. There's footage. So the terminal was accessed under his credentials while he was eating dinner. Yes, which means either his credentials were stolen, or he gave them to someone. Ose's voice was flat, not accusatory, just stating the shape of the information. I ran the secondary analysis on the personal frequency signal. Whoever transmitted on your channel used a device with military-grade encryption hardware, not commercial, not improvised. She paused. The signal characteristics match a classified communications package that Iron Ridge issued to 5 personnel last quarter for field operations. Which 5? Ose looked at her. I need the names, Dara. Ose turned back to her screen, typed something, looked at the result for a moment as if giving herself the chance to not say it. Hurd was one of the 5, she said. Elena was in the corridor outside operations when the lights went out. Not the base lights. The base had redundant power and the main corridors stayed lit. The lights inside the operations wing. The long rectangular windows that lined the corridor went dark all at once, and through them she could see the secondary emergency lighting kick in, red-tinged and low, the kind that told you something had happened and not yet what. She stopped. The generator drop was wrong. Operations had its own protected power circuit. It was designed to stay active through base-wide outages. There was no weather event significant enough to affect a hardened internal circuit, which meant the circuit had been interrupted deliberately. She keyed her radio. Hatch. Static. Then, Cross, we have a situation. Operations Wing just lost primary power. I know. We also have a personnel accountability issue. A pause that had weight in it. Hurd isn't in the mess hall. We're trying to locate him now. She was already moving. The operations wing door required a keycard and a pin, and it was sitting open when she got there, which was the second wrong thing in 90 seconds. She went through without slowing. The emergency lighting made the space look like a different room than she'd been in 4 hours ago. Familiar geometry rendered strange by color and shadow. The workstations dark, screens dead. The situation displays showing nothing. She moved to workstation 7. The chair was pushed back. Terminal dark. Beside the keyboard, something she nearly missed in the low light. A coffee mug, still warm when she touched it. He'd been here recently, within the last 20 minutes. Captain Cross. She turned. Forsyth was standing in the entrance to the wing with 2 security personnel behind her and an expression that had moved well past measuring into something harder. Step away from the workstation, Forsyth said. Elena didn't move. Hurd was here 20 minutes ago. The terminal's warm. I'm aware. Step away from the workstation. Something in Forsyth's voice made her step away. Not the authority. She'd been ignoring authority all night. Something in the quality of the caution. He's in the building, Elena said. We think so. Then you don't have 6 hours. Forsyth came across the room and stopped 2 feet from her. Up close, in the red emergency light, she looked less like an officer running a process and more like someone who'd been running hard for a while and was very tired. What I'm about to tell you is outside your operational scope, and I'm telling you because you've already figured out most of it, and the part you haven't figured out might get you killed. Elena waited. Hurd has been running intelligence out of Iron Ridge for 14 months. We've known about the operation for 6 weeks. Forsyth's voice was quiet and steady. We didn't know the full scope. We didn't know who he was transmitting to or what they were planning to do with it. The audit was always the plan. Force an event that would create grounds for a mandatory review. Trace the authentication chain. Get him in a documented pattern before he could destroy the evidence. She paused. The ambush tonight was not our operation. But you knew someone was going to create an event. We knew something was building. We didn't know what, when, or... She stopped. Or that they'd send soldiers into a minefield to do it. Forsyth looked at her. No, we didn't know that. The emergency lighting hummed. Outside the operations wing, Elena could hear raised voices. Security personnel moving through the base. The organized search pattern she'd run herself enough times to recognize by sound. Phantom, Elena said. Forsyth's expression told her she'd landed somewhere. He's not working for Hurd, Elena said. He's working against him. The whole Valley operation. The ambush, the minefields, the way he positioned himself to look like a threat while functionally providing overwatch for my extraction. He's an asset, Forsyth said quietly. Not ours, but running the same objective from a different direction. Whose? That's the part I can't tell you. Can't or won't. Both. Elena absorbed that. The pieces that had been moving since the first radio click rearranged themselves into a shape that was still incomplete but recognizable. Someone outside the base had known about Hurd's operation for longer than Forsyth's team had known and had decided that the cleanest way to expose him was to use the base's own investigative triggers against him. Force a field incident, force the audit, and use Elena as the mechanism because her behavioral patterns were predictable enough to be planned around. She thought about what that meant, being known that well by someone she'd never met. It should have unsettled her more than it did. Where would Hurd go? She asked. If he's in the building and he knows the audit is running... Server room, Forsyth said immediately. He needs to get to the backup drives before the audit completes. If he wipes the secondary logs, we lose 3 months of documentation. They looked at each other. Security is moving toward the east wing, Forsyth said. Server room is west. Elena was already heading for the door. The server room was in the basement of the west wing, which put it below grade and behind 2 security doors that both required keycards Elena didn't have. She was standing at the second door working through her options when she heard something on the other side. Not loud, but distinct. A sound that didn't belong in a server room. The specific dense thud of someone moving equipment they weren't supposed to be moving. She keyed her radio. Osei, server room, west wing basement. Can you kill the secondary door lock from signals? A pause. That's a security override. I need authorization from Dara. He's in there right now. Another pause. Shorter. The lock clicked. She went through. The server room was colder than the rest of the building, the kind of aggressive climate control that large processing systems required. The air tasting like ozone and recycled cool. The rows of server racks ran floor to ceiling in two long columns, and the emergency lighting here was dimmer, the red light barely reaching the floor between racks. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of hardware being disconnected, cables pulled, a drawer opened and shut. She moved along the outer wall with her back to the racks and came around the second column. Major Callum Hurd was 41 and unremarkable looking in the way that made him good at his job. Medium height, medium build, the kind of face that didn't prompt second looks. He was crouched in front of an open rack panel with a portable drive in one hand and a look on his face that lasted exactly 1 second before it went flat and professional. He stood up slowly. They were 8 feet apart. He still had the drive. "Captain Cross," he said. His voice was steady. She noted that. "You've had a long night. Put the drive on the floor." He looked at it, then back at her. "This doesn't work the way you think it does." "I don't think it works any particular way. I think you're holding evidence in a federal investigation, and I'm asking you to put it on the floor. You're not authorized to—" "Callum." She kept her voice level and her hands visible, which she'd found over the years was more effective than the alternative. 6 soldiers almost died tonight because you sent them into a minefield. 2 of them didn't make it. Whatever you think you're protecting—" She paused. "Put the drive on the floor." Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. She'd been looking for guilt, and it wasn't there. Something more complicated. The expression of someone who had made a calculation that they still believed was correct and was very tired of defending it to people who couldn't see the full picture. "You got them out," he said. "Yes." "That was the plan." She went very still. "What?" "You were supposed to get them out." He said it without apparent irony. "The ambush was constructed so that you specifically could navigate it. The approaches were mined in a pattern that allowed for the cliff route. The machine gun placements covered every conventional approach, but left the western face viable for someone with your capability and your—" He stopped. "Your specific way of thinking." She stared at him. The cold air moved between the racks. Somewhere above them, she could hear the building. The hum of systems. The distant sound of people searching. "You built the trap that I escaped," she said. "I built a mechanism that required your involvement. The 2 soldiers—" Something crossed his face. Fast. Gone. That was not supposed to happen. The minefield pattern was altered. Someone changed the emplacement coordinates in the 6 hours before Bravo team moved. "Who?" He looked at the drive. "The people I've been transmitting to." They had their own timeline. He paused. They were impatient. The shape of it completed. Hurd hadn't been running intelligence for an enemy. He'd been running it for someone who wanted Hurd himself exposed, feeding information to a party that was using his operation to build a case while simultaneously steering the investigation toward him. He was a mechanism, too. He just hadn't known it. "You thought you were the one running the game," she said. He looked at her. "Didn't you?" The door at the far end of the server room opened. Forsyth came through with 2 security personnel behind her, and their light swept the room and found them in 2 seconds. Forsyth looked at the drive in Hurd's hand, at Elena, at the distance between them. "Hurd," Forsyth said. "It's done." He looked at Elena one more time. Something in his expression that she didn't have a word for. Resignation wasn't right. Acknowledgement was closer, like a man who had played a complicated game and wanted the last person who'd faced him across the board to know he understood he'd lost. He put the drive on the floor. Feed. Forsyth's people took Hurd out of the server room at 0347, which was when the snow outside the base was at its thickest, and the world beyond the perimeter lights was completely white and completely dark at the same time. Elena stood in the server room after they left and listened to the building settle around her and did the specific kind of nothing that she'd learned to do after situations that required the mind to catch up with events. She was still there when Briggs found her 10 minutes later. He stood at the entrance to the room, looked at the open rack panel and the drive still on the floor, and Elena standing in the cold, and leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Hatch wants you upstairs," he said. "In a minute." He waited. He was good at waiting, which was one of the things she'd come to value about him. He thought he was running a controlled exposure, she said. Heard. He thought he was feeding intelligence to a party that would use it to achieve an objective, and then the operation would be over and he'd walk away clean. What was the objective? Exposing himself? She looked at Briggs. Someone convinced him that the right way to surface corruption inside Iron Ridge was to build an intelligence operation that would force a mandatory audit. They told him they were working against a senior officer who had protected assets. She paused. I think they told him the right things. I think some of it was even true. Briggs thought about that. And the 2 soldiers who died. Not his plan. Someone changed the minefield pattern. The people he was transmitting to. Yes. Briggs was quiet for a moment. So he did a bad thing for reasons he thought were good, and the people who gave him the reasons were using him, and now 2 men are dead and he's in custody. Yes. He stopped. That's a specific kind of terrible. Yes. She picked up the drive from the floor, looked at it. Whatever was on it was 3 months of communications logs and operational data and the kind of documentary record that took investigators months to work through. She turned it over in her hands once and then held it out to Briggs. Give that to Forsyth, she said. Where are you going? Upstairs. Hatch's office was on the 2nd floor of the operations wing, and it had a window that normally looked out at the mountains. Tonight the window showed nothing but white. He was behind his desk with his jacket off and a cup of actual coffee that he'd poured from a thermos, which meant he'd been awake long enough to need the real thing. He didn't offer her any. Sit down, he said. She sat. The audit pulled 3 months of communications logs in 4 hours, he said. Signals is already working through them. Forsyth's team has heard in a holding room, and he's talking, which means either he knows the game is fully over, or he's been wanting to talk for a while and this was his exit. He looked at her. Preliminary indicators suggest the intelligence he was transmitting went to an outside analytical group, not a foreign asset, domestic. She hadn't expected that. Let it show on her face. We don't know who yet, but the traffic patterns suggest they've been working a larger case, possibly involving multiple military installations, and Hurd's operation was one component. He paused. The ambush and the minefield were not part of whatever Hurd was doing. Someone else added those. Someone who had access to tonight's operational parameters and decided to accelerate the timeline. The changed minefield coordinates. 6 hours before Bravo team moved, someone with access to field operational planning outside of Hurd's known access tier. He looked at his coffee. We have a second problem. Phantom, she said. He looked up. Whoever Phantom is, he was in that valley with foreknowledge of the entire operation, she said. He was positioned before we arrived. He had my personal frequency. He had overwatch capability and used it to protect my team's extraction rather than interdict it. She kept her eyes on Hatch. That's not a hostile asset. That's a coordinated asset, which means someone was running an operation in our operational area tonight that we didn't know about. Yes, and you're going to tell me you can't tell me who. I'm going to tell you I don't know who. He met her eyes. And that is not a comfortable thing for me to say. She believed him. Hatch was not comfortable. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, which were doing something she hadn't seen from them before. A kind of controlled tension that came from not having the answer to a question he thought he should have. The frequency clicks, she said. 3 signals. What does signals analysis say about the transmission hardware? Military-grade encryption. Same package issued to 5 Iron Ridge personnel last quarter, but the signal characteristics don't match any of those 5 devices. He paused. It matches a device that was reported lost in the field 8 months ago. She waited. The device was issued to a warrant officer named Dex Caro, Hatch said. Special operations support element, attached to Iron Ridge for a 6-month rotation. He was declared missing in action after a vehicle incident on Route 11 last spring. No body recovered. The name sat in the room. No body recovered, she said. No. She thought about a figure on a ridgeline, walking parallel to a wounded extraction convoy, keeping pace, holding his hand up in the low visibility for a 19-year-old recon specialist to see. Open palm. Not aggressive. A gesture that meant, I see you. I'm not stopping you. A man who'd been reported missing for 8 months. A man who, if the signal characteristics were accurate, had been in a frozen valley tonight with access to a classified communications device and foreknowledge of a highly specific military operation. Dex Caro, she said, I need to ask you if you've had any contact with him before tonight. No. Any knowledge of his whereabouts since the vehicle incident? No. She looked at Hatch. But he knew mine. Hatch nodded slowly. We pulled his service record after the signals analysis came back. Before his assignment here, Caro spent 3 years running deep cover intelligence operations in contested environments. His operational profile indicates... Hatch paused, and for a man who chose his words carefully, this particular pause meant the next words mattered. A high degree of autonomous decision-making, pattern-based targeting, ability to run extended solo operations without command support. You're saying he's been in the field for 8 months, running his own intelligence operation. I'm saying that's the most coherent explanation for what we're looking at. And he built tonight, the ambush mechanism, the valley operation, the frequency contacts. He built it to expose Hurd. Possibly. But the 2 deaths weren't his design. She was certain of that in a way she couldn't fully justify. The valley had shown her what Caro's design looked like. Precise, conservative with casualties, built around her capability rather than against it. The minefield change was different. Brutal, blunt, indifferent to the people in the path of it. Someone else changed those coordinates. If Caro has been in the field for 8 months running a solo operation, he would have sources. He would have intelligence on the valley's operational parameters. Hatch looked at her. If he knew the coordinates were changed, he would have known 2 soldiers were going to die in a minefield. She stopped. And he came anyway. Yes. Which means he decided the overall objective was worth it. Or he decided it was already too late to stop it, and the extraction was the only thing left to do. Hatch set his coffee down. I want to be very careful here, Cross. I want you to understand that whatever Caro's intentions were tonight, he ran an unauthorized intelligence operation in an active military area and got 2 soldiers killed in the process, even if the minefield change wasn't his direct action. He is not... I know what he is, sir. Do you? She thought about the radio clicks, about the open hand on the ridge, about a service record that included 3 years of deep cover work and a device reported lost in a vehicle accident that might not have been an accident. He wanted me to know he was there, she said, not for the extraction. The extraction was already in motion. He wanted me to know because... She stopped. Thought. Because there's something else, something that didn't get resolved tonight. Hatch watched her work through it, didn't interrupt. Hurd said the people he was transmitting to had their own timeline. They changed the minefield coordinates because they were impatient. She looked at Hatch. Impatient about what? Hurd's exposure was already in motion. The audit was triggered. What were they rushing toward? We don't know. Something is happening after tonight, she said. Hurd's exposure was a step, not the objective. Someone needed the Iron Ridge communications logs in their possession before something else happens, and they needed it on their timeline, not ours. She leaned forward. The drive Hurd was trying to wipe. What's on it that they wanted? Hatch's jaw tightened. Forsyth's team is working through it. What does Hurd say? He says he doesn't know the full scope of the operation he was feeding. He's protecting someone. Possibly, or he genuinely doesn't know. Hatch stood up, went to the window and looked at the white nothing. I've been in this work for 30 years, Cross. I've seen operations where everyone thought they were the one running the game. I've seen those operations end badly in very specific ways. He kept his back to her. Tonight feels like one of those. She sat with that. Outside, the storm was doing what storms did, making the world smaller, closing off options, reducing everything to what was immediately in front of you. Somewhere out there, a man who had been missing for 8 months was moving through a whiteout that would cover every track he left. By morning, there would be no trace of him on the ridge, in the valley, or anywhere a search team could reach before the snow set. He had let her find the door. She had found it. But she hadn't walked all the way through yet, and she was starting to understand that the door didn't lead where she'd thought it led. It didn't lead to Hurd and a completed investigation and a closed case. It led to something larger that she didn't have a shape for yet, and Caro had known she would need to keep going, And that was why he'd made himself known to her. Not the radio clicks, not the open hand. Something he'd left behind more deliberately than either of those. She went back over the night, the culvert, the extraction route, the conversations, Santos, the drive. The server room? She stopped. Santos. Before the ambush, did you receive any unusual traffic? She'd asked him about the route update. He'd answered about the route update, but he'd said something else, a detail she'd logged and not yet retrieved. We had a route update about 40 minutes before we hit the field. Command traffic, encrypted, came through normal channels. But the timing felt late. We were already moving, which meant they'd been moving before the update, following the original route, 40 minutes before contact. The minefield had been encountered 20 minutes after the update, which meant if the original route had been maintained, if the update had never come through, Bravo team would have been on a different road entirely when the minefield was triggered. The route update hadn't sent them into the minefield. The route update had sent them to a minefield that was already laid on their original route. She stood up. Hatch turned from the window. The route update, she said, it didn't change their path into danger. It changed their path into a different danger, one where the approach pattern was survivable for a specific extraction method. She was talking through it as it assembled. Hurd pushed that update because someone told him to, because without it, Bravo team hits a field on Route 11, and there's no cliff approach, no culvert cover, no viable extraction angle. With the update, they're in Blackstone Pass, which has the western cliff face, which is the only approach in the entire operational area that works for a 4-person improvised rescue. Hatch stared at her. He didn't send them into a minefield, she said. He moved them out of a worse one. He just couldn't tell anyone that without exposing what he knew about the original field placement. She looked at Hatch, which means Hurd knew about the original minefield. He knew what was already laid, which means he knew more about the Valley operation than he's saying. Or, she stopped, or he knew because Caro told him. The word landed in the room and sat there. Caro told Hurd, she said slowly, not the people Hurd was transmitting to. Caro, directly. Caro found out the original route was mined, made contact with Hurd, and told him to push the update, knowing that Hurd pushing the update would be logged, would be traceable, would be one more piece of the evidentiary record. She looked at Hatch. He used Hurd's own operation to save the soldiers, and documented it while he did it. Hatch sat down. She'd never seen him sit down in the middle of a briefing. He's not just running an intelligence operation, she said. He's building a case. A complete, documented, legally coherent case against whoever is at the top of this. And every piece of tonight, the ambush, the extraction, the audit trigger, Hurd's arrest, the drive, every piece is evidence in that case. And you, Hatch said quietly, you're in it too. She looked at him. Your actions tonight, he said. The extraction, the server room, the frequency contacts, all of it is documented, witnessed, logged. He met her eyes. You're not incidental to his case. You're part of the architecture. The cold air from the window found its way across the room. She could feel it on the left side of her face, the same side where a sniper round had passed 3 inches from her cheek 4 hours ago, and taken a chunk of concrete off a culvert wall instead. She thought about a man she'd never met who had spent 8 months in the field building something large enough and careful enough that it could stand up to whatever scrutiny it would face, who had planned around her behavioral patterns not to trap her, but to use them, to use her the way she used terrain, the way she used weather, the way she used everything that was already in the environment. She thought about the last radio click, the one she'd heard from the vehicle, in the storm, moving away from the valley. One click, not a signal, not a request, a period at the end of a sentence. Done. For now. He's going to reach out again, she said. Probably. Not to the base, to me. Yes. She looked at the window, at the white nothing outside it, at her own reflection in the glass, a 30-year-old woman in field gear with concrete dust still in her hair, and a shoulder that had been quietly reporting events all night and was now beginning to argue. What do you need from me? She asked. Hatch picked up his coffee. Right now, go to medical and get that shoulder looked at. It's fine. It's not fine. It's been bothering you since the cliff, and you've been ignoring it for 4 hours, and I need you functional. He looked at her over the coffee cup. Then sleep, 6 hours minimum. And after that? He set the cup down. After that, I think we're going to find out that tonight was the beginning of something significantly more complicated than a field extraction. He paused. And I think you already know that. She did. She stood up. Her shoulder made its argument more clearly at the change of position, and she let it, catalogued it, accepted it, kept moving. At the door, she stopped. The two soldiers, she said, Kerrigan and Walsh. She'd gotten their names from the casualty report. Were they? Both attached for less than 2 months. Neither had family on record. Hatch's voice was careful. They were known to their team. Yes. She put her hand on the door, felt the cold metal of it. Outside in the corridor, the base was settling into the particular quiet of a long night approaching its end. The storm pressing down on everything. The world reduced to what was inside these walls and what was buried in the snow outside. Whatever Caro is building, she said. Whatever case he's putting together. She didn't turn around. When it's time, I want to be in it. Hatch said nothing. She took his silence for what it was and walked out. The medical station was quiet at 0400. The surgical team had finished with Velez 40 minutes earlier, and he was in recovery, sedated, his vitals on a monitor that beeped with the specific patience of machines that didn't know what the night had cost. Rourke was in pre-op for the leg. Donovan was in observation with a neurologist who'd been pulled from off-base housing and had arrived with her hair still damp and her coat over her scrubs, which Elena noted because it was the kind of detail that told you the situation had been serious enough to move fast on. The medic who looked at Elena's shoulder was a specialist named Tomas Gura, 23, who had the slightly over-careful manner of someone still learning that patients who minimize their injuries were not doing him a favor. He moved her arm in 3 directions, pressed 2 specific points, and looked at the resulting expression on her face. You climbed a cliff on this, he said. It's fine. It's a grade 2AC sprain, and you've been running on adrenaline for... He checked the clock. 6 hours. It's going to feel significantly worse in about 40 minutes when the adrenaline finishes. I know. You should have come in 3 hours ago. I was busy. He didn't have a response to that. He wrapped it efficiently, gave her 2 tablets she pocketed without looking at, and told her to come back in 8 hours. She said she would and meant it about as much as she meant anything at 0400 after a night like this one. She sat in the waiting area outside recovery for a while. Not because she needed to, because the alternative was her quarters, and the alternative to that was the debriefing cycle that was going to start in a few hours when Forsyth's people had worked through more of the communications logs. And she needed a space in between those things that wasn't any of them. The waiting area had 4 chairs and a table with a magazine from 3 months ago and a window that showed the same white nothing as every other window in the building. She sat in the chair closest to the wall, which was a habit she'd had since her second deployment and had stopped noticing. She thought about Kerrigan and Walsh. She did this deliberately, which was the only way she knew how to do it. Not dwelling, not cycling, just looking at it directly, the way you looked at damage in the field to understand its scope. 2 men she hadn't known. 2 men who had been attached for less than 2 months, which meant their team was still learning their names in the specific way that took time, and now the learning had stopped. She hadn't gotten them out. She'd gotten 4 out, and 2 were already beyond getting out when the night began, and knowing that didn't make the weight of it less, just differently distributed. She stayed with that for about 6 minutes. Then she put it somewhere that wasn't the front of her mind and let it be there. Madani came through the waiting area at 0420, still in his field gear, looking like the night had put him through something he hadn't fully processed yet. He stopped when he saw her. They told me to go sleep, he said. Same. He looked at the chair beside her. She nodded. He sat down. They didn't talk for a while. It was a comfortable silence, which told her something about him that she filed away. Velez? He said finally. I know. I've been doing the math on what would have happened if we'd been another 20 minutes. He stopped. I've been told not to do that math. Whoever told you that was right. I know. I'm still doing it. He looked at the floor. Is that normal? She thought about the honest answer versus the useful answer and decided they were the same one. It gets more manageable, not smaller, just more manageable. He nodded, sat with that. Farrell wants to know if she's in trouble, he said. For what? The modified flare assembly. Apparently that wasn't exactly standard kit. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Tell her she's not in trouble. She'll want that in writing. She won't get it. He made a sound that was close enough to a laugh. After a minute, he stood up and rolled his shoulders and headed for the door. Stopped. Captain. She looked at him. That cliff approach, he said. Was that the plan when we left, or did you figure that out on the way? She considered how to answer. I had a general principle, she said. The specific application came from Farrell. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. I'll tell her that too. Don't tell her that. Too late, I already decided. He left. She listened to his footsteps fade down the corridor and then sat in the quiet again. The recovery monitor beeped. The storm pressed against the window. Somewhere in the base, Forsyth's team was working through 3 months of communications logs, and Hurd was in a holding room talking to people who were very good at listening, and a drive with evidence on it was being copied and documented and entered into a chain of custody that would eventually lead somewhere. She needed to sleep. She did not sleep. At 06:30, her radio clicked. She was still in the waiting area, sitting straighter than she'd been an hour ago, the shoulders argument having graduated from noteworthy to insistent. The base had begun its morning cycle around her, shift changes, the distant smell of the mess hall, voices in the corridor picking up their daytime register. One click. The frequency she'd stopped setting aside. She looked at the radio for a long moment. Then she pressed transmit. One click back. Silence for 4 seconds. Then a voice. It was a man's voice, low and even, with the specific flatness of someone who'd spent a long time in environments where vocal modulation was a survival consideration. Not whispering, just controlled. You found the door, the voice said. She kept her voice the same. I found Hurd. That's not the door. She waited. The drive, the voice said. The secondary log partition. Forsyth's team will find it in approximately 2 hours when they get to the third archive layer. Before they do, there's a file packet, encrypted, tagged with a date stamp from 8 months ago. That packet is addressed to you. She stood up. Why me? Because you were the mechanism that made the audit run. Legally, in the chain of evidence, your involvement tonight creates a specific standing that Forsyth's team doesn't have for that particular material. You know chain of evidence law. I know a lot of things I wasn't supposed to need. She moved to the window. White outside, the storm dropping off now, the first gray of a real dawn starting at the edge of the cloud cover. You're Caro. A pause. Not confirmation. Not denial. The file packet, he said. It contains the source material for what Hurd was feeding, not the people he thought he was feeding, the actual recipients, the organization above them. Another pause. Hurd didn't know the full chain. He knew 2 people. The packet traces the chain above those 2 people. How high? High enough that when Forsyth's team reads it, they're going to want to talk to people who don't want to be talked to. She absorbed that. You spent 8 months building this. Some of it was built before I went missing. She heard the precise word choice. Before you went missing, not before the vehicle incident. Those are different events. She thought about what Hatch had said. A high degree of autonomous decision-making. A device reported lost that wasn't lost. An MIA report that was apparently a door someone had stepped through deliberately. Why are you telling me? She asked. Forsyth's team will find the packet. They'll find it. They'll process it. They'll refer it up a chain that has some of the same names as the packet. He paused. You understand what that means? She did. It goes to the people it's evidence against. Referral protocols go where they go. I don't control that part. His voice shifted slightly. Not warmer, but with a different quality. You do. I'm a captain in a mountain rescue unit. You're also the person who documented tonight, who made the extraction happen, who found Hurd, who identified the route update logic. A pause. Your name is on a lot of paper from the last 6 hours. You have standing that Forsyth doesn't, that Hatch doesn't. You can refer material in a direction that the standard chain can't touch. She pressed her hand against the cold window glass. The dawn was getting clear at the edge of the clouds. Who do I refer it to? There's a name in this packet, he said. A federal investigative office that's been running a parallel track on this for 2 years. They've been waiting for the evidentiary piece that Iron Ridge could provide. You couldn't just send it to them yourself. Material from a missing in action asset running an unauthorized field operation isn't legally admissible without a chain of custody that starts in theater. His voice was still flat, but she could hear the shape of something in it. Not frustration, exactly. The particular weariness of someone who had been very careful for a very long time. It needs to start with you. She was quiet for a moment. What happens to you? A beat. That's not the relevant question. It is to me. He didn't answer that directly. The packet has everything Forsyth's team needs and everything the federal office needs. Once it's in the right hands, it moves without me. And you. I'll be fine. Which was not an answer. Which she recognized as deliberately not an answer and let it be that. The frequency, she said. The device. Signals matched it to Hurd's issued package, but the characteristics were wrong. I modified it. While in the field, for 8 months. It wasn't complicated. She heard something in that. Not pride, something quieter. The reflex of someone who had learned to do things alone for so long that the listing of those things felt almost embarrassing. Blackstone Pass, she said. You were there before we arrived. 12 hours before. You watched the whole valley operation. Yes. The 2 soldiers. Oh, I knew. His voice changed on those 2 words. Just slightly, but she heard it. I found the original field the day before. Mapped it. Got word to Hurd about the route update in time. I thought in time. Someone pushed the execution timeline up 6 hours without authorization. I didn't find out until they were already moving. A pause that had actual weight in it. I couldn't stop the trigger. I could only position for the extraction. She stood at the window. Dawn was definite now. A gray-gold line where the cloud cover ended. The storm's backside moving east and taking the whiteout with it. The mountains would be visible in an hour. Kerrigan and Walsh, she said. Yes. She let that sit between them. The person who changed the timeline, she said. That's in the packet too. Yes. Who is it? Read the packet. She took her hand off the window. The cold had moved through her palm and into the bones of her fingers. I need to tell you something. All right. Whatever you've built, whatever case you've put together, it matters. I understand why you made the choices you made. She paused. And I think 2 men are dead partly because of how long you waited, and I think you know that. The radio was silent for long enough that she thought he might have cut the transmission. I know that, he said. She nodded. He couldn't see it. She nodded anyway. I'll find the packet, she said. The line went quiet. Not dead. She could hear the carrier signal, the faint white noise of an encrypted channel held open, like he was still there, like he'd stayed on the line for a reason that wasn't additional information. After a moment, she clicked off. Forsyth was in the operations wing at 700 with 3 members of her team and the particular expression of someone who had been awake all night and had found things that made the sleeplessness worthwhile. She looked up when Elena came through the door, and something shifted in her face. Not surprise, but the adjustment of someone recalibrating. You should be asleep, Forsyth said. 3rd archive layer, Elena said. Encrypted file packet, date stamped 8 months ago. It's addressed to me. Forsyth went very still. The 3 team members looked at each other. You've been in contact with Caro, Forsyth said, 30 minutes ago. On what channel? The same channel he used all night. Elena held her gaze. He said you'll find the packet in about 2 hours. I'd like to be in the room when you do. Forsyth looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the archive terminal where one of her people was working through the 3rd tier of the communications logs. The analyst, a staff sergeant named Brock, heavy-set, reading glasses, methodical in a way that suggested he had no interest in being fast, if fast meant being wrong, looked up from his screen. I can accelerate the 3rd-tier search, he said. Forsyth made a decision. Elena could see it happen. Not a long process, just a conclusion reached and implemented. Do it! Brock turned back to his screen. Elena found a chair against the wall and sat in it. Forsyth came to stand nearby, not sitting the way she operated, on her feet in contact with the room. The call this morning, Forsyth said quietly. How much did he tell you? Enough to understand the architecture. And? He's been building a federal-level case for a year or more. The Iron Ridge operation was one component. He needed an in-theater chain of custody that the standard referral process couldn't route through compromised channels. She paused. He needed me specifically because of what I did tonight. Forsyth processed that. He engineered your involvement. He planned around my behavioral patterns. That's different. Is it? She thought about it honestly. Mostly. Forsyth sat down. First time Elena had seen her do it in a non-briefing context. She looked tired in the specific way that had nothing to do with hours slept. Caro's service record. How much do you know? What Hatch told me. Deep cover, autonomous operations, 3 years before Iron Ridge. There's more. Forsyth looked at the window. Dawn was properly established now, the mountains visible again, white and enormous, and completely indifferent. Before the deep cover work, Caro was an intelligence analyst. Good one. He flagged an internal corruption case 2 years before the vehicle incident. A procurement fraud operation that was running through 3 installations, including Iron Ridge. He filed the report through standard channels. Elena waited. The report was reviewed by 2 officers, Forsyth said. Both of them are in the packet. Both of them are senior to everyone in this room. She paused. The report was buried. Caro was transferred to Iron Ridge on paper and put in a deep cover assignment that was designed to keep him occupied and away from the original case. And instead, Elena said, he used the deep cover assignment to build the case himself. For 8 months? Apparently starting about 48 hours before the vehicle incident that wasn't an accident. Elena looked at the analyst working through the archive. Brock was moving with more focus now, following a specific search parameter, his shoulders slightly forward. Someone tried to kill him, she said. We think so. The vehicle recovery team found evidence of a brake failure that was initially attributed to mechanical wear. When Caro didn't surface, Forsyth stopped. The assumption was field incident, MIA, eventual KIA determination. Nobody had reason to look harder. Except he wasn't dead. No. He went dark, Elena said. Used the MIA status as cover. Rebuilt the case from the outside, while maintaining enough connection to Iron Ridge to monitor Hurd's operation and position for an extraction when the timeline moved. Forsyth paused. Whatever else he is, he's methodical. 2 soldiers are dead. Yes. Forsyth met her eyes. And he probably saved 4 more, and possibly a great deal more than that if the packet is what he told you it is. Elena said nothing. I'm not making an argument, Forsyth said. I'm stating the full picture. I know. Brock turned from his screen. Major Forsyth, I've got it. Oh? The packet was encrypted with a key that required 2 separate authentication inputs, one that Brock found in the archive header, and one that Elena realized when Brock looked at her was going to come from her. He put a credential gate on it, Brock said. Secondary key requires a biometric or a personal authentication string. Elena looked at the screen. A text field waited. She thought about the radio call, about Caro's voice, controlled and flat, giving her information without explaining everything. She thought about what he'd said first. You found the door. She typed, Westcliff. The packet opened. Forsyth leaned forward. Brock's fingers paused above his keyboard. Elena looked at the screen and felt the specific quality of a thing that had been built carefully over a long time arriving all at once. The packet was 63 files. Documents, communications logs, financial records, a 17-minute audio recording that had a date stamp from 14 months ago, and a location marker for a building in a city 200 miles from Iron Ridge. 3 personnel files with photographs, a map of an operation that had been running for over 2 years across 4 military installations. And at the top of the file index, a cover document addressed to Captain Elena Cross, Iron Ridge Special Operations Rescue. She read the cover document. It was 3 pages, single-spaced, and it was the most carefully written thing she'd read in a long time. Not because of the language, which was plain and direct, but because of the precision of the evidence structure. Every claim supported, every connection documented, every gap in the record acknowledged and explained. It was the work of someone who had learned that unsupported claims didn't survive contact with powerful people who wanted them to fail. The two officers whose names appeared at the top of the recipients list were Brigadier General Marcus Truwell and a civilian contractor named Arthur Cade, who held a senior advisory position attached to the Department of Defense's Installation Management Office. The procurement fraud that Caro had flagged 2 years ago had moved several $million through falsified contract vehicles over a period of 3 years. It had also, as a secondary function, created the conditions for the intelligence leak operation at Iron Ridge by embedding Hurd as a monitored asset. They hadn't turned Hurd against his own base. They'd manufactured an environment where Hurd believed he was acting on principle while feeding information to people who had very different principles. Elena read the audio recording transcript first. 14 months ago. Truwell's voice, identifiable from his service record, and Cade's voice, and a third voice that the packet identified as Hurd. A meeting in which Hurd was recruited, his legitimate concerns about institutional corruption acknowledged and redirected. He'd been handed a cause and a contact and a set of procedures that served someone else's goals while appearing to serve his own. He hadn't been a traitor. He'd been a tool who thought he was a weapon. Well, Forsyth said. She'd been reading alongside Elena. Her voice was very quiet. That's going to be a complicated arrest. Multiple arrests, Elena said. Truwell has a star. I know. Forsyth straightened up, looked at the ceiling briefly. The specific look of someone organizing a very large and immediate problem. The federal referral address in the cover document. Do you know the office? No, I do. Forsyth's voice was careful. They've been building a case file on installation procurement fraud for 2 years. They've been stalled on the evidentiary piece. She paused. They've been waiting for exactly this. Caro knew that. Caro has apparently known a great many things for a long time. Forsyth looked at her. The referral has to come from you. He structured it that way deliberately. I know. You understand what that means operationally. Referring material against a brigadier general, I understand. You'll be on record, formally, officially, attached to this by name. I said I understand. Forsyth looked at her for a moment, not challenging, something more like assessment. Hatch said you told him you wanted to be in this. I did. That was before you knew how far up it went. Elena looked at the personnel file with Truwell's photograph. 14 years of his service record. 3 commendations she recognized as genuine and a procurement history she now knew was not. A man who had successfully buried a corruption report 2 years ago by moving the person who filed it to an assignment designed to eliminate him. Who had, when that didn't work, sent people to make sure. Who had built something durable and protected and well above the level of the people doing the work. It doesn't change it, she said. Forsyth held her gaze for another moment. Then she turned to Brock. Start the copy process. I want 2 encrypted copies on separate storage with chain of custody documentation starting now. She looked at the other 2 team members. Nobody discusses the content of this material outside this room until I say otherwise. Understood? Understood. She turned back to Elena. I need to brief Hatch. I know. And Hatch is going to brief his commander. Who is Truwell? Elena said. The room went quiet. Brock stopped typing. Forsyth said nothing for 4 seconds, which was a long time in a room that had just processed that information. Then, Hatch's chain of command goes through Truwell's office. Yes. So the standard reporting chain goes directly to one of the targets. Elena kept her voice even. Which is what Caro told me. He said the standard referral protocols route to people whose names are in the packet. Forsyth pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. It was the first genuinely human gesture Elena had seen from her. You cannot make a unilateral referral to a federal investigative office that bypasses your command chain without, I know what I can and can't do. Then what are you proposing? Elena looked at the cover document on the screen, at the address at the bottom, the federal office, the name Caro had put there. She thought about what Caro had said. You have standing that Forsyth doesn't, that Hatch doesn't. She thought about a 30-year-old woman sitting in a mountain rescue command post with a duffel bag packed for a flight that had never left, about the specific weight of being the mechanism someone else built, and the question of what you did with that when you understood it. I'm not proposing anything yet, she said. I'm thinking. Forsyth watched her think. So did Brock, which he realized after a moment and looked back at his screen. What Caro had built required her. Not because she was the most senior person available, not because she had the deepest institutional knowledge, but because her actions tonight had created a specific documented record that positioned her at the intersection of every piece of this. The field operation, the audit trigger, the server room, Heard's arrest. She was the through line. And the through line had standing that the branches of the investigation didn't. She could refer material to the federal office. She had the standing. She had the chain of custody documentation from tonight. She had the packet, addressed to her, authenticated by her credential. And a referral from an operational officer based on field evidence obtained in theater had a different legal character than a referral from a counterintelligence team working an internal audit. Caro had built that too. "I need an hour," she said. Forsyth looked at her. "For what?" "To read the full packet, all 63 files." "We can brief you on the—" "I need to read it myself." She held Forsyth's eyes. "If I'm making this referral, I'm making it based on my own assessment of the material. Not a summary, not a recommendation. Mine." A beat. "Fair," Forsyth said. "Brock, give her a secure terminal." She read for 90 minutes. It was more than she'd expected and also exactly what she'd expected, which was the particular experience of evidence that had been assembled by someone very good. The procurement fraud was documented in enough granular detail that she understood not just what had happened, but how. The specific mechanism, the contract vehicle, the falsified vendor records, the payment routing. It was the kind of financial architecture that required someone with technical knowledge and institutional access and a sustained disregard for consequence. Truel hadn't done it alone. Cade had structured the financial side. There was a third figure, a contracting officer at another installation named Reese Vallow, who had managed the vendor documentation. And below all of them, like the floor of a building nobody was supposed to see, was the intelligence leak operation. Not running parallel to the fraud. Running as a function of it. The leak had been the security system, feeding selected material to create the appearance of an ongoing intelligence threat that justified security expenditures that fed back into the contract fraud cycle. It was almost elegant, she thought, and hated herself a little for the thought. At the center of the audio recording, Cade's voice said something that she played twice. The useful thing about idealists is that they believe the story they're told. Heard genuinely thinks he's exposing something. That's the most reliable kind of asset. No management required. She sat with that for a moment. Then she read Caro's final summary page. It was short. 2 paragraphs. The first was the evidentiary summary, clean and precise. The second was something else. She read it twice. The individuals above will present this material as unauthorized, illegally obtained, and inadmissible. They are partly right. The operational methods used to collect this evidence were outside sanctioned parameters, and I have no defensible position on that. What I have is the material itself, and an officer who was in theater for its triggering event and can speak to its chain of custody from that point forward. The legal argument is survivable. The political argument is harder. That's not my calculation to make. I've made the calculations I could make. The rest belongs to whoever is reading this. She closed the file, sat for a moment. Then she pulled out her radio. Hatch was not in his office. She found him in the corridor outside the medical station, which told her he'd already been in to check on the recovery patients, which was a thing she'd seen him do before and had noted as one of the ways he was different from some of the commanders she'd worked under. He looked at her when she came around the corner, at her face, at the radio in her hand. He didn't say anything. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I figured." He looked at the corridor around them, empty at this hour, the morning shift having settled into its routines. "Walk with me." They walked. Not to his office, not to the operations wing. To the east corridor, which was longer and quieter and ended at a fire door that opened onto the side of the building where the vehicle parking was, and the storm's cleanup crew was running a snowplow. He pushed the door open slightly. Cold air. The mountains were fully visible now, white and enormous. Blackstone Pass, a dark crease in the face of the nearest ridge. Last night's operational area, now indistinguishable from any other section of mountain. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it, not a summary. The real account. The way she'd give a field report, starting from the radio call at 0630 and ending with the 90 minutes in front of the secure terminal and the 2 paragraphs at the end of Caro's summary. Hatch listened. He was good at listening in the same way he was good at being still. Not passive, just entirely present, processing rather than waiting for his turn. When she finished, he looked at the mountains for a while. "Truell," he said. "Yes. I've worked under Marcus Truell for 3 years. I know. And you're telling me I'm telling you what the documentation shows." She kept her voice even. "I'm not asking you to believe it because I'm saying it. I'm telling you the packet exists, and it's on a secure terminal in the operations wing, and you can read every one of the 63 files yourself." He was quiet for a long time. The snowplow moved past the far end of the parking area, grinding and steady. "If you make this referral," he said, "directly to the federal office, bypassing the chain of command." "It's not a bypass. It's a parallel referral based on in-theater evidence. The legal distinction." "I know the legal distinction." He looked at her. "I'm asking about the practical one. You're a captain. You'll be on record challenging a general officer's integrity based on material collected by a missing in action asset running an unauthorized operation." "I know. The people who want this to go away have significantly more institutional weight than you do. I know that too. And," she looked at the mountains, "at Blackstone Pass, at the place where 6 soldiers had been last night and 4 had come home. Caro spent 8 months in the field," she said, "alone, building something that he knew would probably cost him his career and maybe more than that, because the report he filed 2 years ago went nowhere, and the people who buried it tried to make sure he couldn't try again." She paused. "He did it anyway. And then he put the last piece of it in my hands because I was the only one who could carry it in a way that would hold." Hatch said nothing. 2 soldiers died last night," she said, "partly because Truell's operation set conditions that someone else exploited. Partly because the fraud was using the security threat as a mechanism, and that mechanism put real people in real danger." She turned to face him. "I'm not doing this because Caro built it for me. I'm doing it because it's the right thing, and I can do it. And those 2 facts don't usually arrive together this clearly." Hatch looked at her for a long time. The cold air moved between them, carrying the snowplow's diesel smell and the clean, particular smell of new snow over mountains. "What do you need from me?" he said. She felt something release in her chest that she hadn't known she was holding. Not relief, something quieter. "I need your signature on the chain of custody documentation as commanding officer of the in-theater operation. It strengthens the referral's standing. You're asking me to sign documentation that goes to a federal investigative office without going through my command chain, which runs through Truell." He looked at the mountains again, a long moment. "The soldiers," he said. "Kerrigan and Walsh. Their families are going to be notified today." "I know. I'd like this to mean something for that." "So would I." He was quiet for one more beat, then he turned back toward the door. "Give me 20 minutes with the packet, then bring me the documentation." She held the door for him. He went through without looking back, which was its own kind of answer, and she followed him into the warmth of the building and let the door close behind them on the mountains and the clean, cold morning and the long white face of Blackstone Pass standing in the distance like it had always been there and always would be, indifferent to every decision made in its shadow. The referral was filed at 11:40. Forsyth's team had the copies processed and sealed by 1200. Hatch signed the chain of custody documentation at 12:15, sitting at his desk with his jacket on and his coffee untouched, reading each page once before he signed it and not rushing the reading. Elena stood across the desk and watched him do it and didn't say anything. At 12:30, Hurd was formally transferred to federal custody, which was faster than the standard protocol and reflected the specific nature of the charges and the weight of the material supporting them. At 13:40, a federal officer named Sandra Voss called the Iron Ridge operations line from a field office 2 states away and asked to speak with Captain Elena Cross. The call lasted 12 minutes. Voss spoke the way federal investigators spoke when they had been waiting for a piece of something for a long time, and it had finally arrived, careful, precise, and with the specific warmth of professional relief. She told Elena the office had been building toward this for 2 years, that the material in the packet completed an evidentiary structure that had been missing its keystone, that the referral, properly documented, would hold. She also told her that it was going to be complicated, slow, and that Elena should expect formal questioning within the next 2 weeks, and should probably speak to a JAG officer before that. Elena thanked her and hung up. Osei was at the signal station when Elena came through, running routine traffic at this point. The night's intensity settled into the baseline activity of a working day. She looked up. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. "Terrible." "Gura told me you'd say it was fine." He was wrong. Elena stopped at the edge of the station. "The frequency. If the device transmits again, I'll route it to you directly." Osei paused. "Captain, is he coming back? Caro?" Elena thought about the radio call. About that's not the relevant question, and the silence that had followed her asking about what happened to him. "I don't know," she said honestly. Osei nodded, turned back to her station. Then, "The open hand. What Farrell described." "Yes." "Is that a signal, militarily?" "I've been trying to figure out if it means something specific." Elena thought about the ridgeline in the low visibility, a figure that had every reason to stay invisible choosing not to. A gesture that was almost impractical, almost too human for the situation. "I think it meant he saw her," she said. "That's all, just he saw her and he wanted her to know." Osei looked at that for a moment. "Okay," she said, and turned back to her work. Elena walked out of signals and down the corridor toward her quarters, and the building moved around her with its ordinary daytime sounds. Doors, voices, equipment, the institutional hum of a place that ran continuously. And the shoulder made its case steadily, and she was tired in a way that had settled into her bones. And somewhere out there, in the mathematics of a complicated case that was finally moving, two men's families were getting a knock on the door that would divide their lives into before and after. She reached her quarters, opened the door. The duffel bag was where she'd left it, zipped by the far wall, with the wrapped gifts sitting on top of it. She sat on the edge of her bunk, picked up her phone. Her father answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake and probably had been for a while, because he knew her travel had been delayed, and he was the kind of man who didn't sleep well when he was waiting for something. "Elle," he said. Just her name, just the sound of him knowing it was her. "Hey, Dad." She pressed the phone against her cheek. The shoulder protested the angle. She didn't change it. "I'm going to be a few more days." A pause. Not surprised. The pause of someone who had given up being surprised by this specific news years ago and had learned a different relationship with it. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at the duffel bag, at the gift, at the window of her quarters, which showed a sky that was clearing now, blue showing between the clouds. The storm fully departed and the world outside clean and very cold and completely altered from the world it had been 12 hours ago. "Yeah," she said. "I'm all right." Another pause, then, "I'll keep the coffee." "Keep the coffee," she said. She heard him settle in whatever chair he was sitting in, somewhere hundreds of miles away in a kitchen she knew as well as any place she'd ever been. And the line stayed open for a moment with just the sound of distance and the particular quiet of someone who loved you waiting without asking anything. She let it be that. Then she said goodnight, even though it was afternoon, because that was the word that fit. And she set the phone down and lay back on the bunk with her boots still on, which she never did, and looked at the ceiling of her quarters while the building went about its business around her. The referral was filed. The packet was in the right hands. Whatever came next was going to take time, and she was going to be in the middle of it. And it was going to be more complicated than she could fully see from here. She knew that. She closed her eyes anyway. She slept for 5 hours and 40 minutes, which was more than she'd expected and less than she needed. And when she woke, the room was dark, and the shoulder had made good on every promise it had issued during the night. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. The bass sounds had shifted into their evening register, quieter, more deliberate, the particular acoustic texture of a place settling into its overnight cycle. Through the window, the sky had gone the deep blue of a winter evening after a storm, and the first stars were showing over the ridgeline. She got up slowly, took the 2 tablets Gura had given her, stood at the window and looked at the mountains while she waited for them to begin doing whatever they were going to do. Blackstone Pass was a shadow in the darkening ridge, no different from any other shadow at this distance. No indication that anything had happened there 18 hours ago beyond what the mountain chose to show, which was nothing. Mountains didn't mark events. That was something she'd always found either comforting or terrible depending on the day. Today it was comforting. She changed her shirt, found a clean one in the bottom of the duffel bag, and left the quarters. The mess hall was half full. Evening meal, the post-storm quiet that settled over military installations after bad weather. A specific collective exhale, people eating with slightly more attention than usual, conversations lower, the accumulated tension of the last 24 hours metabolizing into something that looked like ordinary life. Briggs was at a table by the far wall with a tray that suggested he'd been awake long enough to have eaten 2 meals already and was working on a third. He looked up when she sat across from him. "You look like you slept," he said. 5 hours. "Better than me." He pushed a plate toward her. Bread rolls still warm. "Farrell's been asking about you." "Is she all right?" "She's 19 and she did something genuinely difficult last night, and nobody's fully debriefed her on what it all meant, so she's running on adrenaline and incomplete information, which is a specific kind of uncomfortable." He looked at her. "She needs to hear from you that she did well." "She did well." "Tell her, not me." Elena took a roll. Her appetite had come back in the specific, forceful way it did after extended field operations, the body filing its claim for everything it had spent. She ate without tasting it particularly, which was fine. "The referral went through," she said. Briggs nodded. He'd heard. Word moved at its own pace inside installations, and there was no controlling it, only accepting it. "Trewell," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, working through something she could see moving behind his expression. "I served under him once, before Iron Ridge, 3 years ago." He pushed the bread plate back to the center of the table. He gave a speech at a memorial service, one of those, the kind where they get the words right. The cadence, the weight. He stopped. I remember thinking he meant it. "Maybe he did," she said. "People compartmentalize." "That's a generous reading." "I know." He looked at her. "Are you being generous or are you being accurate?" She thought about Heard, about Cade's voice on the recording, the most reliable kind of asset, no management required, about how easy it apparently was to build a house of arranged truths and live in it long enough that the arrangement felt like the foundation. "Accurate," she said. "People mean things and do other things simultaneously. It doesn't make the other things less wrong." Briggs sat with that. Then, "What happens now?" "Federal investigators work the case. It takes time. There will be hearings, probably." She paused. "JAG wants to talk to me in 2 weeks. Are you worried?" "About the legal standing of the referral?" "About any of it." She considered. "I'm worried about Trewell's legal team and how long this takes and whether it holds together. I'm not worried about whether it was the right thing to do." She finished the roll. "Those are separate concerns." He nodded slowly. "Caro. What about him? Do you think he's actually all right? Wherever he is." She didn't answer immediately. She thought about the voice on the radio. The 8 months, the precision of everything he'd built, and the 2 paragraphs at the end of the cover document, the acknowledgement that the operational methods were indefensible, and the passing of the remaining calculation to whoever was reading. "I think he's been managing all right for a long time," she said. "Whether he's all right is a different question." Briggs looked at his tray. "Yeah." They ate in silence for a while. Around them, the mess hall did its ordinary thing. Trays, voices, the specific institutional smell of food prepared in large quantities. Normal, functional. The business of a place continuing to be itself, regardless of what had happened in the hours preceding. She found that she was glad of it. Farrell was in the signals room, which was where Elena had expected to find her, and she was doing something on a secondary screen that she minimized quickly when Elena came in, which told Elena it was either personal or investigative, and she didn't need to know which. "You're not on shift," Elena said. "I know." Farrell turned in her chair. She looked tired, which was appropriate, and she had the particular quality that Elena had noticed before, the quality of someone who processed events by staying close to the place they happened. Elena sat in the adjacent chair, the same chair she'd used when talking to Osei at 02:30 the night before, which felt like a longer time ago than it was. "You did well last night," she said. Farrell looked at her. "Briggs told me you'd say that." Briggs was right. "He also said you'd mean it, which is the part I'm trying to—" Farrell stopped, looked at her hands. I modified the flare assembly without authorization and used it in an active field operation. Yes. And that's okay. It worked, Elena said, which doesn't automatically make unauthorized equipment modifications okay, but it worked because you thought clearly under pressure and because you understood what the situation needed. That's the part that matters long term. Farrell was quiet. Then, the sniper. Phantom. What about him? I keep thinking about the hand. She looked up. The open hand. I had my rifle on him, and he just looked at me and put his hand up. A pause. I've been trying to figure out if I should have engaged. Doctrine is for situations where you understand the variables, Elena said. You didn't fully understand the variables. Neither did I. You made a judgment call in real time with incomplete information, and the judgment was right. How do you know? Because we're all home. Farrell sat with that. Outside the signals room, the corridor was quiet. The evening shift was light. Do you think he was trying to protect us? Farrell asked. The whole night. Do you think that was what he was doing? Elena thought about the most honest answer. I think he had an objective, and protecting us was part of how he pursued it. Whether that's the same as trying to protect us, she paused. Maybe it doesn't matter much. The outcome was the same. It matters to me, Farrell said. The difference between someone using you toward a good outcome and someone trying to help you. Yeah, Elena said. It does matter. She looked at the screen where Farrell had minimized whatever she was working on. What are you researching? Farrell hesitated. Then she pulled the screen back up. It was a service record. I found it in the declassified personnel index. Partial record. A lot's redacted. She turned the screen. Warrant Officer Dex Caro. Elena looked at the photograph. The man in it was maybe 35. Unremarkable looking the way men who were good at field work often were. Medium everything. The kind of face that didn't leave an impression on people who weren't paying close attention. He was in dress uniform. The photograph looked like it had been taken before whatever had changed things. Before deep cover, before the intelligence report, before the vehicle incident that wasn't an accident. He looked like a person who had not yet made the decision that would define the next 2 years of his life. What are you looking for? Elena asked. I don't know, Farrell said honestly. I just wanted to know who he was. Before. Elena looked at the photograph for another moment. Then she looked at Farrell. 19 years old, sitting in a signals room after midnight because she couldn't make herself leave, trying to understand a man who had put his hand up in the dark and let her see him and then disappeared into a storm. He was an analyst, Elena said. He found something, filed a report, and got moved to an assignment designed to keep him away from it. Most people, that's the end. They accept it, or they leave the service, or they find a different way to be useful. She paused. He decided there was another option. It cost him a lot. Yes. Do you think it was worth it for him? Elena thought about the cover document, the 2 paragraphs at the end. The rest belongs to whoever is reading this. I think he decided that the question of worth wasn't the relevant one, she said. I think he decided this was the thing in front of him to do, and he did it. Farrell looked at the photograph. Is that what you do? When things are hard? You just decide it's the thing in front of you? Sometimes. She stood up. Sometimes you also want to throw things. But mostly yes. Farrell made a sound that was almost a laugh. Go sleep, Elena said. You've done everything you can do tonight. Yeah. Farrell closed the screen. Captain, what about Madani? Last night was really hard for him. I know, I'll talk to him. You don't have to do that, I know I don't have to. She looked at Farrell. Go sleep. She found Madani not in his quarters but in the small staff room off the medical station, sitting with an untouched cup of tea that had gone cold, reading the same page of a book he'd been reading when she came to collect him the night before. The spine was still taped. He looked up. She sat across from him. Velez is stable, he said. I checked an hour ago. I know. Rourke's surgery went well. Donovan's follow-up scan showed improvement. I know all of that. She looked at him. How are you? He closed the book. I keep thinking about the 20 minutes, whether if there had been a way to... There wasn't. You don't know that. You're right. I don't know that with certainty. But I watched you work in conditions that most field medics don't train for, with equipment you had to improvise, on a timeline that was controlled by everything except your own judgment. You made the right calls with what you had. She paused. That's all any of us did last night. He looked at the cold tea. Velez kept asking for water. When I had him on the IV, he kept asking. I had to tell him no because of the TBI risk, and he stopped. I kept telling him he was doing great. He wasn't doing great. He was critical. I didn't know what else to say. You told him something that would keep him calm and cooperative, she said. That's not dishonesty. That's medicine. I know. He turned the book over in his hands. I know that cognitively. The other knowing takes longer. He looked at her. Does it actually get easier, or is that just something people say? She thought about all the times she'd been asked that, and all the answers she'd given, and what the most accurate version was. It gets more familiar, she said. Familiar isn't the same as easier, but familiar means you start to know how to carry it without it taking over. She paused. The first time I lost someone on a field extraction, I spent 3 weeks going over every decision, every second. I didn't sleep well for a month. How many times have you lost? 4, she said, in 4 years. All of them I've gone over. All of them I still go over sometimes. She held his eyes. That doesn't stop, but it becomes something you can carry alongside the rest of it. He nodded, slowly. Go to sleep, she said. Is that an order? It's a strong suggestion from someone who's been awake for 30 hours and is telling you this from experience. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. She stood up, stopped at the door. The book. She nodded toward it. Same page as last night. He looked down at it. I know. It gets better. He looked up. The book, she said. You'll get to the next page eventually. She left before he could figure out if that was a metaphor or a practical statement, because it was both, and she was tired enough that she didn't want to explain it. Pochel. 11 days later, Brigadier General Marcus Truel was placed on administrative leave pending federal investigation. The announcement came through official channels on a Thursday morning, terse and procedural, the language designed to convey minimum information while satisfying reporting requirements. Elena was in the operations wing when the notification moved through the system, and she read it on a secondary screen while Brock, at his own station, read it at the same moment and said nothing, just turned slightly to look at her. She gave him a small nod. He turned back to his work. The federal office moved quickly after that, or quickly by the standard of federal investigations, which meant that things happened over the course of the next 3 weeks that would have taken months without the packet. Arthur Cade was arrested at a scheduled conference in an office building 2 states away. Reese Vallow, the contracting officer, was picked up the same afternoon. The procurement fraud case expanded to encompass the other 3 installations, and the financial audit that followed found 8 years of layered contract manipulation that would take a team of forensic accountants the better part of a year to fully document. Truel's legal team was exactly what she'd expected. Aggressive, experienced, and constitutionally opposed to the pace the federal office wanted to move. They challenged the chain of custody, challenged the evidentiary standing of the in-theater referral, challenged the operational methods used to obtain the original source material. The challenges were systematic and some of them were legitimate. None of them succeeded. Forsyth told her in a conversation that lasted 4 minutes in the corridor outside the operations wing that the chain of custody documentation Hatch had signed was the thing that held. The referral from an operational captain based on field evidence, properly documented with the commanding officer's authentication, had a standing that the defense couldn't undermine without also undermining the entire evidentiary structure of the opposing argument. Caro had built it to hold. Sandra Voss sends her regards, Forsyth added, which was not a thing Forsyth usually said, and Elena noted it. Her regards, Elena said. She said to tell you the referral was the cleanest piece of documentation they'd received in 2 years of work, and that your JAG officer can stand down because the legal standing isn't in question from the federal side. Elena processed that. Thank her for me. Forsyth almost smiled. It was a very small almost. I'll pass it along. Hurd's situation was more complicated, which she'd expected. He was cooperating fully, had been from the night of his arrest, and the cooperation was genuine rather than strategic. She could tell from the way the investigators described his statements, which she had access to in summary form through Forsyth. He had genuinely believed he was exposing corruption. He had genuinely been used. The question of where moral culpability lived when the two facts coexisted was something that was going to occupy lawyers and review boards for a long time. She didn't know how it would resolve. She had a view, and she'd shared it in her own statement, and after that it wasn't her decision to make. Some things weren't. Santos came to find her 4 days after the announcement. She was in the operations room, reviewing terrain analysis for an upcoming exercise that felt surpassingly normal given everything that had preceded it, and he knocked on the door frame and stood there with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who had something to say and was taking his time deciding the best order to say it. "Staff Sergeant," she said. "Captain." He came in, stood across the desk. "I wanted to come sooner, but they had us in debrief for—" "I know, it's fine." He was quiet for a moment. "Donovan's back to full cognitive status. His wife drove up last week. I saw them in the mess hall." He paused. "He doesn't remember most of the extraction, the TBI, but she—" He stopped. "She wanted me to pass something along." "She didn't have to. She wanted to." He looked at the desk between them. "She just said, 'Thank you.' That's all. She didn't have a bigger message than that." Elena said nothing for a moment. She let it be what it was. "Rourke's going to need physical therapy for 6 months," Santos said. "But he'll come back. He's determined in the specific way that makes medical people nervous." "I know the type." Santos looked at her. "I've been trying to figure out how to ask you something without it sounding, I don't know, dramatic." "Ask." "The cliff. The western face. When you decided—" He stopped. "At what point did you know it would work?" She thought about how to answer honestly. "I didn't know it would work. I knew it was the available option that had the best odds, which is a different thing. But you were certain enough to go." "I was certain enough to go," she said. "Certainty and odds are different things. I've been uncertain about a lot of things I've done anyway." He thought about that. How do you know? When to go anyway and when to stop?" She leaned back in her chair. The shoulder had improved over 11 days to something she was categorizing as manageable, which was not the same as healed, but was working in that direction. "You look at what happens if you don't go," she said. "And you look at what happens if you do. And you make the best call you can with what you know, and then you live with it either way. And when the call costs you, then you live with that too." He nodded, looked at the floor, then back at her. "For what it's worth, for me and the team, we know what you walked into that night, what it was and what it could have been." He paused. "It matters." "I know it matters," she said, not dismissing it, just stating it. "Thank you for saying it." He straightened up. "Kerrigan had a sister," he said. "Walsh had a girlfriend. Long distance, 2 years. They'd only met in person 4 times. He stopped. "The girlfriend sent a note to the unit. Said she wanted to know what his last deployment was like. Whether he was, I don't know." "Okay, before." Elena said nothing. "He was," Santos said. "He was okay. He was good at his job and his team liked him, and the last thing I saw him do, 3 hours before the ambush, was fix Rourke's comms antenna with a piece of wire and a very specific kind of stubbornness." He paused. "I thought you'd want to know that kind of thing existed, in case—" He stopped. "I don't know why I'm telling you." "Because it's worth telling," she said. He nodded once, left without saying more, which was the right call. She sat in the operations room for a while after he left, not reviewing the terrain analysis, just sitting with what he'd left in the room. Walsh fixing a comms antenna with wire and stubbornness 3 hours before. Kerrigan, who had a sister who was going to spend a long time learning how to be a person who had lost a brother. The specific ordinary humanity of all of it, which was the hardest part. Not the abstraction of loss, but the granular specificity of the person who was no longer. She stayed with it until she could hold it and also breathe, which was the test she'd developed for knowing when she was ready to continue. Then she went back to the terrain analysis. The radio clicked on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after Blackstone Pass. She was in her quarters, awake, which she was earlier than usual because she'd slept poorly and given up on sleeping rather than lie there negotiating with it. The click came at 05:10, and she picked up the radio before she was fully upright, which told her she'd been half expecting it. She pressed transmit. Caro? A pause. How's the shoulder? She almost laughed. Didn't quite. Better. Where are you? Somewhere warmer than last time. That's a low bar. Fair. She sat on the edge of the bunk. Outside the window, the mountains were showing in the pre-dawn dark, the ridgeline a familiar cut against a slightly lighter sky. 3 weeks and 2 days since she'd looked at those mountains from the parking lot with Hatch, and the storm still going. It felt longer. I heard about Truel, Caro said. It's moving. Faster than I expected. Forsyth's team, she said. And the federal office. Once they had the packet, they didn't waste time. No. A pause. The legal challenges. Not succeeding. Another pause. She heard something in it. Not relief exactly, but a release of something he'd been holding. I wasn't certain the chain of custody would hold. Hatch's signature helped. I didn't know if Hatch would sign. He read the whole packet first, she said. Every file, 20 minutes, like he said. She paused. He's a careful man, but he signed it. Silence for a moment. The kind of silence that has texture. What happens to you? She asked. Officially, my MIA status will be reviewed. He said it the way people said things they'd had a long time to make peace with. The unauthorized field operation is a problem. The modifications to classified equipment, the operational methods in the packet. A pause. There are arguments to be made in both directions. I don't know which one wins. You could have... She stopped. Could have what? Presented yourself at any point, come in and made the case through official channels. I tried that, he said, 2 years ago. Official channels had people in them whose names are in the packet. I know. She paused. I know that. I'm not saying you were wrong. You're saying there might have been another way. I'm saying I don't know. And I don't have the right to judge it from here. He was quiet for a moment. The two soldiers. Yes, I've thought about that every day. His voice was the same flat, controlled thing, but something moved through it, briefly. I miscalculated the execution timeline by 6 hours. If I'd... Caro, he stopped. I know, she said. I know you've thought about it. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't a miscalculation or that it doesn't matter. It was, and it does. She paused. But you can't carry that as the only part of the story. What do I carry it as? She thought about the most honest thing she could say. The thing that reminds you it's real, that real people are in the variables, that the next calculation has to account for that. She paused. The same thing I carry. Silence. Walsh, he said, and Kerrigan. Yes. I know their names. I know you do. Outside the window, the first suggestion of dawn was beginning at the eastern edge of the ridge. Not color yet, just a gradual differentiation between the dark of the sky and the dark of the mountains. She watched it. You said you'd be fine, she said. 3 weeks ago. I said that. Are you? A pause that went on long enough to be its own answer. I'm working on it, he said finally. That's more honest than fine. Yeah. She shifted on the bunk. The shoulder reminded her it existed. Is there something you need? From me? Is that why you called? No. He paused. I called because I wanted to know how the shoulder was. She sat with that for a moment, the simplicity of it. A man who had spent 8 months alone doing something enormous, calling at 05:10 in the morning to ask how her shoulder was. It's better, she said. Still there, but better. Good. Caro. Yes. When this is resolved, whatever the review board decides, when it's done. She paused. If you need, I don't know what the right word is, a reference, a statement of operational conduct, a contact inside Iron Ridge who knows what actually happened. She stopped. I'm saying you don't have to do the next part the same way you did the last part. A longer silence. Thank you, he said, not accepting it, not declining it, just acknowledging it, which was its own kind of answer, and she decided to let it be that. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Captain. The line went quiet. She held the radio for a moment, then set it down on the nightstand beside the drawer where she'd put the sidearm the night everything started, a month ago, when she'd made herself leave it there so she could feel like an ordinary woman going home. She wasn't that woman. She'd known that for a long time and spent a lot of energy being ambivalent about it, which she was starting to think was energy she could use better elsewhere. She picked up her phone, booked the flight. Gone. Her father's kitchen table was smaller than she remembered, or she was bigger, or both. The measurement of distance was always imprecise after long absence. He'd made the good coffee, the kind he kept for when she visited, and the cup was heavy ceramic that was warm in both hands, and she was sitting across from him in the kitchen of the house she'd grown up in, and outside the kitchen window there was a yard that was covered in ordinary city snow that had nothing to do with operational parameters or extraction routes. He looked older. She registered this with the specific, uncomfortable clarity that distance always produced. The way time moved differently in the lives of people you weren't present for, accumulating in their faces while your mental image stayed fixed. His hair was more gray than she'd held in her mind. He moved with a slight stiffness when he'd gotten up to pour the coffee. He was still him. She was still glad to be here. He didn't ask about the sling. She'd told him on the phone a training incident, which was a word that covered a great deal, and he'd accepted it with the practiced acceptance of a man who had spent 30 years learning not to ask the questions his daughter couldn't answer. "You look tired," he said. "I slept on the plane." "That's not the same as rested." "No," she said, "it's not." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. Outside, a neighbor's dog was doing something in the yard next door, and somewhere down the street a car was having a conversation with a cold engine. Ordinary sounds. The specific ordinary sounds of a place where nothing had happened lately that needed to be survived. She felt the specific weight of the last month begin, very slightly, to redistribute. "The gift," he said. She'd put it on the table when she came in. He'd been looking at it without comment for the last 10 minutes, which was a thing he did, respecting the timing of things. "It's late," she said. "Christmas presents don't expire." He reached for it. She watched him open it, the careful way he opened things, which had always been his way, saving the paper, taking his time. Inside was a photograph she'd had printed and framed. The mountains above Iron Ridge, taken in October before the first snow, the ridge line clear against a blue sky that had the specific depth that only came at altitude. He looked at it for a long time. "Where is this?" he asked. "Where I've been," she said. He nodded slowly, set it on the table facing him. She watched him look at it, this man who had given her enough of himself that the parts of her she liked best came from him, and who had spent 4 years reading whatever was in her face when she called home, and knowing there was a great deal more she wasn't saying. "The shoulder," he said. "Really?" "Field operation," she said, "not training." He looked at her over the coffee cup. His eyes were the same. Whatever else time had done to him, his eyes were the same. "Were you all right?" he asked. She thought about the honest answer, about a cliff face in the dark, and a shoulder that had filed its protest at every step of it, and 6 soldiers in a concrete culvert, and a radio that clicked in the specific language of someone who trusted her to understand it, and 2 men whose names she'd be carrying for a long time. "I was all right," she said. "Not the whole time, but at the end, yes." He nodded. "I did something that mattered," she said. And then, because he was her father and he'd earned it, I'm not completely sure what it cost yet, but it mattered. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She looked at the photograph of the mountains and held the warm cup and let herself be exactly where she was for once, without the part of her brain that was already calculating the next problem, the next route, the next extraction. Just here. Just this. The review board convened 6 weeks after that. Caro presented himself voluntarily, which the board noted in the formal record as relevant to the question of good faith. The proceedings were classified and Elena wasn't present for them, but Forsyth told her afterward, in the same 4-minute corridor conversation style she'd come to expect, that the board had reached a finding of unauthorized conduct with mitigating circumstances so extensive that the disciplinary action was substantially reduced. He wasn't returned to active duty, but he wasn't prosecuted, and the Federal Investigative Office had submitted a formal statement on the value of the intelligence material and the role it had played in the procurement fraud case, which the board had read and apparently sat with for a while before issuing its finding. He left the service with an honorable discharge, which was the part of the outcome she'd hoped for and had not known whether to expect. She found out because Forsyth told her, which was Forsyth's way of doing the things she didn't do overtly, which was keeping Elena informed about the things she needed to know. She didn't hear from Caro again. She'd wondered if she would. She'd decided that either way was all right. The open hand on the ridge, the radio clicks, the voice at 0510 asking about her shoulder. Those were a complete thing in themselves, a short and specific form of connection that had existed in the circumstances that required it and didn't need to extend beyond them. Some things were whole in the time they occupied. That was enough. 3 months after Blackstone Pass, on a morning that was cold but not the sharp hostile cold of that night, she was in the operations room reviewing the preliminary debrief from a routine medical extraction in the northern sector when Hatch appeared in the door with the specific quality of presence that meant he had something to say that wasn't operational. She looked up. He came in, closed the door, and stood with his arms crossed in the posture she'd spent 2 years learning to read. "There's a position," he said. "Federal Interagency Task Force, Joint Military and Civilian, Oversight Mandate on Installation Management and Procurement Compliance." He paused. "They're building the team. They want someone with field credibility and demonstrated understanding of how internal corruption operates in practice." She looked at him. "They asked for you specifically," he said. "By name." Sandra Voss's office made the referral. She set down the debrief. "That's not a rescue mission." "No, it's a different kind of mission." "I'm good at rescue." "You're good at a great many things," he said, "some of which you've been underutilizing." She thought about that. About a cliff face and a server room and a cover document and a chain of custody that had held because it was built to hold. About the specific feeling of being the through line in something that mattered. "What would I be doing?" she said. Specifically, going into installations, looking at what's actually there, using the kind of operational judgment that can't be taught in a classroom. He paused, catching things early. Before the minefields, he meant, before the ambush, before the soldiers. "I'd have to give up Field Rescue Command," she said. "Yes." She looked at the debrief on the desk. The routine extraction in the northern sector. A broken leg, a medical emergency, 2 operators recovered safely. Important work. Work she was good at and that needed doing. She also thought about Kerrigan's sister and Walsh's girlfriend of 4 times in 2 years and Hurd's face in the red emergency lighting as he put a drive on the floor, and what it would mean to stop something like this before it built to the point where it needed a valley and a minefield and 2 deaths to end it. "Can I have a few days?" she said. "Take a week," Hatch said. "Don't take longer." He left. She sat in the operations room alone with the morning light coming through the window and the mountains showing clear on all sides and the specific weight of a decision that didn't have a wrong answer, just 2 different right ones. She thought about what she'd told Farrell. Sometimes you just decide it's the thing in front of you to do. Sometimes that was enough reason. She picked up the debrief and finished reading it because it still needed to be done and she was still here, and the mission in front of her today was this one, and she'd learned a long time ago that the present decision deserved the same attention as the future one, but she already knew, somewhere that wasn't the front of her mind yet, which way she was going. She took the position. She gave Briggs a handshake that turned into something closer to an actual hug, which surprised both of them. She gave Farrell the field assessment write-up that said she had exceptional operational judgment under pressure and recommended her for accelerated advancement, which Farrell read in the signals room and folded carefully and put in her pocket without saying anything, which was the right response. She told Madani that the book would eventually make sense again, and he told her he was on chapter 4, and she told him that was real progress. And he said he wasn't sure she was still talking about the book. And she said she wasn't completely sure either. She said goodbye to Osei by standing next to her station for 5 minutes and talking about nothing in particular, which was how Osei preferred it, and Osei said she'd route any unusual frequency activity to Elena's new office if she ever heard it again, and Elena said that would probably not be necessary, and Osei said probably not and went back to her screens. Hatch stood in the parking lot when she drove out, the way he'd stood at the door of the equipment room the night everything began. Not approving, not disapproving, just present. Acknowledging the moment without needing to define it. She raised a hand as she drove past. He raised one back. The mountains were behind her in the mirror, white and permanent and completely unchanged, standing in the flat winter light the way they'd always stood. Blackstone Pass a crease in the ridge, exactly as it had always been. She watched it in the mirror until the road bent and it disappeared behind the tree line. Then she looked forward. The road ahead was clear. The strongest people are rarely the ones who always know what to do. They're the ones who are honest about what they don't know and go anyway, who carry the weight of what things cost and don't let it make them smaller, who understand that the right decision and the easy decision are almost never the same thing, and who choose the right one even when only they will ever know the difference. That's not heroism. That's just a life, lived with your eyes open.